Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was 700 hours. It was time to leave the house. Stephen carefully stepped out into the hallway so as not to wake his mother, who had the only day off in the last week and a half. In the semi-darkness, Stephen looked for a brush to shine his shoes. "Why don't you turn on a light? Why are you walking in the dark?" Stephen twitched. His mother stood in the doorway in surprise, dressed in a terry cloth robe. It was obvious from her face that she hadn't had a good night's sleep and was probably torn with her son. "Jesus, Mom!" shrieked Stephen, theatrically clutching at his heart. "Why scare you in the dark?" "Because I didn't want yours, but something got in the way. But apparently it was me who woke you up. You're giving me a hard time. You should get married." "Mom, stop raising your voice a little," objected Stephen. "If you want me to move out, just tell me so." "Well, go on. That's not the point. I'd be happy to have you live with me forever. You're not really 20 years old anymore, are you?" "No. I should have a family by now. Or at least a girlfriend. All I have on my mind right now is my thesis. Okay, I gotta go. I have to teach my first class. I don't want the teacher to be late." "Well, you might want to think about it. I've got one." Stephen didn't want to listen to his mom and quickly ran out of the apartment. He was tired of listening to such conversations. For the last year and a half, his mother often started them. At first, the young man did not pay attention to them. After all, every mother sooner or later talks about marriage or marriage. However, Camille turned out to be a more persistent woman than she seemed to her son. Almost every day, she told Stephen directly that he was lonely. And if her son didn't do something about it in the near future, he would be left with his nose to the grindstone. Maybe she's right about something. "I've never been in a serious relationship. I spent all my time studying," he thought to himself during his mother's fiery speeches. Stephen was a stocky brunette with blue eyes. As soon as he was born, everyone around him said that girls would chase after him. The people around him were right. However, the guy did not pay any attention to this. Since childhood, he was attracted to books on the world around him, classic fiction. Playing soccer with boys in the yard is not for him. But he still had to go out, as Mom insisted on taking sunbaths and daily told about the benefits of fresh air. These few hours were hard. Stephen tried to pretend he was having fun. He kept in touch with the boys. And the time spent socializing with his peers, Stephen always regretted. Since there was a sea at home, read books that his father brought him when he came from business trips. Christopher, Stephen's dad, is a lifelong engineer at an aircraft factory. He is considered a valuable member of the workforce, so management often sends him to other plants for training. Camille and Christopher lived together for 12 years. This time was the happiest for Stephen, despite the increasing quarrels of his parents. As a child, he did not pay much attention to it. However, as a teenager, after every time he heard his mother screaming, he felt as if a knife had pierced his heart. Stephen realized that the divorce would not pass. He dreamed of staying with his father afterward, as there was something more than father-son love that bound him to him. Christopher, as well as Stephen, was crazy about reading books. Every week he would bring 5 new works into the house. For some people, that might have been enough for a month or 2. However, Stephen's father would devour the books he brought in within 4 days. The salesman in the bookstores thought he didn't work. That's why he read so much. That was not the case. Christopher worked 8-10 o'clock a.m. jobs at the company. He'd come home, help his wife with the housework. He didn't have any personal time until after the sun went down. Reading took up a lot of time he could have spent sleeping. But sleep, as they say, is for wimps. Stephen still remembers getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, walking down the corridor, and in the far room modestly burning Boss. Dad read until 3-4 o'clock. Of course, he didn't get much sleep, but his favorite occupation helped him to relax after a hard day's work and the next scandals with Camille. As a child, Stephen tried to understand why books attracted his father so much. when he asked him what was so fascinating about them. His father handed him a book by Jack London called Hearts of Three. Stephen did not want to read this work because he thought it was written for girls since it had the word hearts in the title. He overpowered himself. He came home after school, did his homework, and opened the book. Jack London's world sucked the boy in so much that he lost track of time. By 12 o'clock at night, he found that he had already read 2/3 of the work. He was eager to find out how the story would end. However, a shout from his mother at the other end of the house, who saw the light in his room, made it clear that it was time to go to bed. From then on, Christopher began to buy not 5 but 10 books a week. Camille did not welcome such a hobby, as she believed that the money spent could have been used for home improvements, upcoming renovations, the purchase of her personal car. But also, after all, the money should be given to her mother. Only she would know how to handle it. Yes, that's exactly what she thought. When the divorce began, Stephen was invited into the courtroom, asked who he wanted to stay with. Naturally, the boy, without hesitation, admitted that he would be more comfortable being with his father after he expressed his opinion. He was escorted out of the room where the meeting was taking place. Stephen was not worried, as he was confident that the judge would listen to him. When the hearing was over, the doors opened, and he saw his mother's happy face. Behind her walked Christopher, looking him in the eye. Stephen understood everything. It turns out that his mother has provided the judge with irrefutable evidence that it is better for her son to be with her, and only she knows how to properly build him a happy future. After this turn of events, Stephen was depressed. However, he came to terms with the decision. His father promised that he would visit him, often taking him for weekend sleepovers. This was the only thing that gave the boy strength. The years went by. Dad kept his word, despite the fact that it had been more than 15 years since the divorce. Christopher called his son every day, asking how he was doing. These conversations were a real outlet for Stephen. In them, they shared their opinions about the books they had read, and also recommended each other new works to familiarize themselves with modern literature. Because of the fact that the boy was fond of reading, Camille was afraid that he would enter the philological faculty or a higher education institution, the direction of which is devoted to the study of literature. It was a surprise to everyone that Stephen decided to follow in his father's footsteps. It cannot be said that he had no trouble getting into the first year of the best institute in the city. However, luck was on his side. Applicants with the highest scores chose other educational institutions, so Stephen got on the lists of people on the budget-based training. The first 2 courses were easy for him, as there were a lot of general subjects, and when the 3rd year began, Stephen realized that it would be difficult, but he was ready for everything. It was Christopher who helped him to keep his spirits up throughout his studies. He supported him in every way he could. When Stephen was down and his father saw it, he would call him to his workplace and show him in detail what he was going to do when he graduated. Camille was not thrilled with her son's choice of profession. She thought that he should have chosen a more promising specialty, such as programming. After all, in her opinion, people there do nothing and shovel money. Stephen's mother worked in the beauty industry, making women irresistible. Before attending an important event, as well as emphasized their beauty in everyday life, she worked as a makeup stylist, did hairstyles, makeup. The whole working day she spent on her feet, from which she was very tired. But she liked to feel useful and needed. Despite the fact that she was constantly surrounded by friends and her son, she was always lonely, although she did not admit it to anyone. So she tried to work without days off, and only when the pain in her legs became unbearably strong. She would take a vacation, but no more than 1 day. Because of this rigid working schedule, Camille Stephen managed to do everything during the day. After school, he would come home, do his homework, cook dinner, and spend time reading books. At the institute, he seemed close to everyone, so he had few friends. Stephen did not regret it, because he thought that there was nothing to talk about with these people, as they were only interested in partying and parties. Stephen's personal life was also going downhill. No, he wasn't a virgin. He had a couple one-night stands with girls he didn't know very well. It wasn't done out of love, just to drown his physiological needs. He wanted to find his love. But things were the same as with friends. The girls were only interested in expensive travel gifts of self-development. They clearly didn't want to engage. Why didn't they arouse interest in Stephen? After successfully completing the master's program, Stephen decided that he would continue his studies and enrolled in graduate school. Well established himself among the teaching staff. The guy was entrusted with conducting some disciplines. He liked to spend time with students. He paid enough attention to each of them to make them understand the subject and successfully pass the exam in the future. That day, after talking to his mother about the urgent need to get married, Stephen had to conduct the first pair in the subject of electrical engineering for Camille. The young man was 10 minutes late for the pair. By this time, all the students were in the assembly. They were very fond of the subjects that the young man was conducting. After the roll call was conducted, the young instructor noticed that there was one girl present in the classroom who was not on the list. He asked her to introduce herself and then found out that she had transferred to this group from another major. She was a fragile girl with big blue eyes, mustache, and hair. She stood out from the rest of the group. Therefore, Stephen figured she would have a hard time. As the pair came to the end of the class, the students thanked the instructor and scattered to go about their business on break. After Stephen collected all his materials from his desk into his briefcase, he noticed that the new girl was still in the classroom. "Stephen, hello. My name is Smith Emily." With shyness in her voice, said the student. "Good afternoon," smiled and answered the teacher, Smith Emily. "I am glad to welcome you to our group. Of course, it seems strange to me that you decided to transfer in the middle of the school year. I think it's going to be difficult for you." "Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I realize I missed a few classes, and I can't hide the fact that it was really hard for me right now. I didn't understand anything. Therefore, I would like to ask you to recommend me some literature that would allow me to catch up." At that moment, Emily put her purse on the table, opened it, and began to look for her daily planner. While Stephen was thinking about which method books to recommend to the student, he watched her every move and noticed that there were error search markers in the bag. "Are you interested in drawing?" the teacher inquired. "What? Oh yeah, you know, it's a real passion of mine. I have been drawing as long as I can remember. Can I see your works?" Emily did not refuse the teacher, despite the fact that her works were somewhat frank. The student confidently handed Stephen her beach sketch. The young man was at first embarrassed by the student's candid work, but continued to familiarize himself with her work. The spreads depicted nude and semi-nude, nude, male and female bodies, mostly without faces. All the reading lines and reliefs were done so filigree that Stephen could not think that the author of these works is a girl who is not yet 25. "You know, they are very beautiful works." Continuing to look, Stephen said, "I can't understand one thing, how you ended up in engineering." "Oh, Stephen, it's all very complicated. My father wanted me to get a good profession that would bring me a lot of money in the future. I don't like to argue with him. So I went to your institute." "What do you mean, our institute?" "But it's just that my home is 150 kilometers away. From here I decided that it is better to leave my parents' house, to study at the university as my father wants, and to do my favorite business, like I want to do." Yes, I understand you," as no one else smiling, said Stephen. After a short conversation with the new student, the young teacher dictated to her a list of teaching aids that would help her to understand the essence of the subject faster. At this, the young people said goodbye. Emily went to the next pair, and Stephen went to the department, where he was preparing for the next lecture. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. The young man excused himself and went home. On the way, he stopped by a bookstore where he bought 2 new detectives. Stephen was in a great hurry, as he dreamed of starting reading as soon as possible. After all, it was these books that caused a great stir among the population of the whole planet. Opening the door to the apartment, he noticed that on the threshold there were 2 pairs of women's shoes, which his mother did not have. Apparently, she had visitors. "Mom, hi. I'm not hungry. I'll go to my room. I bought new books. I'll read." "Oh, Sashenka, we've been waiting for you. Why did you take so long?" Out of breath, Mother asked. "I had to replace Rick, who got sick. The students have exams coming up, so they can't miss classes. God, but you don't take care of yourself at all. Come on, I'd better introduce you to someone." Camille took Stephen by the hand and led him into the kitchen. When he crossed the threshold, he noticed a smartly set table where two women were sitting. One of them was about 45 years old, and the other was apparently her daughter, because he gave her a look no older than 21. Stephen immediately realized what was going on. Despite this, he was in shock, because his mother had never allowed herself such antics before. "I don't get it. Is this matchmaking? Are we living in the 19th century? Son, can you believe it? Evelyn just happened to be walking by our house with her daughter Jenna. We ran into each other in the driveway when I was coming back from the store. Evelyn is an old friend of mine. I'd really like you to meet her," Camille said without making a show of it. It didn't bother her that there was some confusion on her son's face. "Hello, Evelyn. Nice to meet you. Jenna, my respects." At that moment, Stephen pretended to take off his hat. Camille was shocked by this prank. Her son had always had good manners, and what had happened to him now was beyond her comprehension. The woman quickly came to her senses and continued to steer the conversation in the right direction. Jenna sat with the man at the table. It was immediately obvious that she was not happy about this turn of events either. However, the simplicity of the young man helped her to relax and enjoy the conversation. After looking around the table, Stephen concluded that his mother had put a lot of effort and spent a lot of money to prepare all these exquisite dishes. He had no other choice, so he sat down at the table and started talking to his guest. "Stephen, Evelyn, you can imagine. Jenna graduated from medical school this year. She was going to enter the institute. However, at a family council, they decided that the best medical training happens abroad. So Camille and Wendy decided that Jenna would go to medical school in Germany. Yes, they did. But I realized that Evelyn and Wendy had decided. I'm interested in a different question, and Jenna agrees with their decision," Stephen asked, shifting his eyes to the girl. "Yes, of course. Stephen, can you imagine what opportunities will open up before me? It's the most advanced technology out there. Pharmaceutical companies annually release hundreds of new drugs that allow you to fight diseases. People with cancer are successfully treated abroad, while in Russia patients die for lack of quality treatment. My dad is the best oncologist in the region. I am very interested in what he does. Our whole family is medical professionals. My mom works with kids. She's a pediatrician. So anyway, I get it. My mom found me not just a bride, but a good match. We're definitely in the 19th century," Stephen thought to himself. The conversation lasted until about 2 o'clock. During this time, Camille managed to tell all the background of her son, and also to show a picture of him as a little boy, lying with a bare butt. Stephen found it difficult to control his emotions. However, he managed to do it. During the meal, the young man saw that in the eyes of Evelyn and her daughter Jenna there is interest, which increases with every minute spent in this house. At one point, Camille called Evelyn into the room to show her collection of house flowers. Of course, this was all done intentionally to leave Stephen and Jenna alone. This made the young man feel even more awkward than when he came home and discovered his guests. The girl started talking about herself, how much she wanted to help people, about how she likes to spend her free time with her friends in cafes or clubs. Stephen had mixed feelings about it. The girl was not stupid. It was hard for him to understand how such a desire to study could intersect with the constant partying in her life. Speech. Jenna was coherent and literate. She had clear thoughts in her head, interesting plans for her life. Yes, she was undoubtedly not the type that usually surrounded Stephen. Despite this, the guy did not feel any attraction to this girl at all. The bulk of the time while the young people were alone, Jenna spoke. Sometimes she realized that she was becoming too much. and she began to ask Stephen questions. Mostly they were questions about his personal life. It made him uncomfortable because that was the life he had been counting and didn't have. He struggled to get out of awkward situations, answered uncomfortable questions, and secretly wished it would all be over as quickly as possible. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn and Jenna started to head home. The prospective mother-in-law showered Stephen with many compliments. In doing so, she hinted to her daughter that she had an enviable groom standing in front of her. In her opinion, he was promising because he was the son of a famous engineer. Stephen thanked the guests for the pleasant conversation, smiled, and escorted them to the door. "What do you think?" It was immediately clear from his mother's voice that she thought everything had gone well. "I'll tell you what I think about the fact that you, without consulting me, arranged this viewing. Why was that necessary? And more importantly, who needed it? What makes you think you can decide for me?" Did Stephen sound anxious and irritable? "Son, I've had 1,000,000 conversations about how it's time for you to get married, but you do nothing. How long can I wait? Do you realize that if things continue like this, I won't have grandchildren at all? I don't want anyone to call me grandmother, but I'd love to see our family continue." "Mom, what lineage are you talking about? Don't you understand? To start a family, you have to meet someone who makes your heart respond. You can't do things the way you've arranged them today. In your opinion, if a man is promising, then he's worthy of continuing the so-called lineage." "Of course I do. What else could it be, son? You wanted a son. I will never let that happen. Who's gonna ask you? I'm almost 30 years old. I'm in a position to decide who I start a family with and when, much less have children." Stephen realized that a dialogue with his mother would not lead to anything good. Camille was in no mood for any kind of compromise, and this family needed it because she considered her son too infantile, unable to build a successful and rich life. "Look, Stephen, two parents should have a perfect set of genes when it comes to procreation. You have to choose your mate responsibly. It will be difficult for you to get married now because, as you said yourself, you are almost 30 years old." Mother's tone has changed. It's as if she's become much calmer, thus misleading. "I don't see you thanking me for having dinner tonight with such distinguished people of our town. You should be happy that I found you an educated prospective bride who is just over 20 years old. You know what that means? That she can give you a healthy baby. Every year it's harder for a woman to carry a fetus to term. The likelihood of genetic diseases increases. Have you thought about that?" To be honest, Stephen was on the edge. He just didn't know what to do or how to end this pointless conversation. He knew that his mother could only back off on one condition, and that was that he had to agree with her. "Lady, you know, I hadn't really thought of that. You're probably right. Jenna's a really nice girl. Maybe I should consider her for a fiancé." He wasn't going to do that, of course. However, that answer completely satisfied Camille, who broke out into a blissful smile. On her face was the expression of a victor after a difficult and bloody battle. That was partly what this dialogue was. "I'm glad, sweetheart, that you have at least one bright thought in your head. Mommy knows what's best for you. You have to trust your mom. You won't regret this choice." "Jesus, what choice is she talking about?" "I was just saying we could consider why she thinks the choice is already made. I've dragged myself to the bottom, and it's going to be extremely difficult to get out." These were the thoughts that were swirling around in Stephen's head. For now he remained silent and smiled, hoping that his mother would now go to get ready for bed. The young man thought that after all that had happened, he would fall asleep somewhere on the way to the bed. His body prayed, leaden eyelids heavier, his consciousness drifting off somewhere far away. However, it only turned out to be a defensive reaction to everything that had happened. Stephen's body was fighting back as best it could, giving him these signals. When he reached the bed, the young man came to the conclusion that Jenna was not the heroine of his novel. For a second, he felt sad that there was no girl in his life who could attract his attention. Despite the constant support of his father, Stephen would very much like to be loved, pitied and supported. When he comes home, ideally, all of this should have been done by his mother, but she was preoccupied with other matters. At some point, Stephen realized that the image of Smith and Emily was popping up in his mind. Partly he felt sorry for her, because she wasn't doing what she would have wanted to do at the Institute. Her work in sketchbook was really good and deserved the attention of others. He was sure that Emily had some large-sized paintings in her arsenal, painted in colors rather than markers. When his thoughts turned from the matchmaking he had constructed to the new student, he calmed down. His body relaxed as much as possible. The brain cleared of heavy thoughts, and Stephen drifted into sleep. The next day, he had to go to work by 12 o'clock. So the young man managed to get a good night's sleep. Stephen woke up to the fact that the sun's rays began to break through the curtain. The sun was playing across his bed, getting rays in his eyes. Upon waking up, the young man noticed that his mother was not at home. This was good news for him, because he could spend the morning in complete peace, have breakfast, prepare for the upcoming lectures, check the students' work that he had to check yesterday. As he passed by the hallway, he noticed a couple of books that had been bought yesterday. He felt a little sad because he had dreamed to start reading them yesterday. But because of everything that had happened, it would have to wait until tonight. Unless Camille comes up with something else interesting. Stephen didn't make it to the bus stop on time, so he missed the bus. The intervals between transportation were long, so he had to call a cab. After selling the car for 15 minutes, he jumped into it, gave the driver the address of the university and relaxed. There were surprisingly quite a lot of cars in the city today, even though it was a regular weekday with no holiday dates ahead. But still, the streets were filled with people, on whose faces a certain puzzled look appeared on Stephen's face when it was only 350 meters to the university. The cab in which he was traveling became stuck in traffic. Looking out of the window, the young man noticed a small accident that took up one lane of traffic. There was an adjuster standing on the road helping the traffic flow. He immediately realized that if he stayed in the car, he would be late for the lecture. So Stephen took cash out of his wallet, gave it to the driver, and said goodbye. Jumping out of the car, he looked at his watch. He was only 15 minutes away from the lecture he was supposed to be giving. It was only 15 minutes away. He shoved his briefcase under his arm and ran as fast as he could. On the way, he had to push people who were clearly not in a hurry to get to class. He even saw his students among them. He wanted to shout something encouraging. Maybe they would rush to the upcoming lecture after that. When Stephen turned towards the students, there was a violent collision. The young man managed to stay on his feet, but he noticed a girl lying on the pavement. Markers and sketches of drawings had fallen out of her bag and were lying on the pavement. Stephen immediately realized that it was Smith Emily. Everyone around them froze. At first, it was not clear whether the girl was conscious or not. The young teacher ran up to Emily. At that moment, she began to rise. Everyone exhaled, including Stephen. "Oh my God. Emily, you're all right. Can you tell me what hurts? Should I see a doctor or call an ambulance?" "Fuck the ambulance. By the time they get here, you might bleed to death. I'll take a cab to the hospital." "Stephen, calm down. What are you, like an elephant in a china shop?" "I can't say I'm all right. My knees are very sore." At that moment, Emily raised the hem of her dress a little. From there showed slender, graceful calves and knees that were shattered all over. A new colored blood started from them. Stephen's heart clenched. He was deeply ashamed. Without thinking, he gathered up all the markers and sketches, put them in Emily's bag, picked her up on his arm, and ran as fast as he could. On the way, he wondered where to take Emily. The girl at this moment was very much surprised, but could not utter a word. If it had been an ordinary person, and not her teacher, she would have started screaming, swearing, fighting. But how to behave in this situation that had developed, and she had no idea. Running up to the institute, Stephen, with Emily in his arms, climbed the stairs and turned in the direction of the infirmary. Its doors were closed. Stephen was angry. He could barely contain himself from swearing at the whole institute. "Emily, do you have a nail stick?" You could hear in his voice that he was holding back his rage. The girl was discouraged by such a question, as she couldn't understand why he needed it. Sawing nails didn't seem like a good time. "Yes, of course there is. Here you go." Stephen took Emily's wand and headed towards the castle. Fortunately, it turned out to be the easiest. It could be opened with a single movement of the hand. Entering the infirmary, Stephen rushed to find hydrogen peroxide, absorbent cotton, and bandages. Emily all this time stood dumbfounded by the sight, on the threshold of which she could not cross. When Stephen had everything he needed in his hands, he turned to the girl. "Why are you standing there? Come in. I'll treat your wounds." "Stephen, thank you, of course, but I could have waited for the nurse to come back. Or, at the very least, I can treat my own knees." Stephen's expression changed immediately. He didn't like to say the same thing twice. So he walked confidently toward the girl, took her in his arms, carried her into the medical center, and sat her on the couch. "Stephen, but really, I can handle it myself. Emily, please sit quietly. I'm responsible for what happened. I have to make it up to you somehow. If you think I have a beef with you, you're mistaken. You didn't deliberately run at me, I hope. If it had been intentional, I'd classify you as a peculiar person. But you're a decent man, a teacher. I realize you were just late, so you were in a hurry, not looking around. Please leave it alone. I'll work on my own wounds." Stephen looked sternly at the student, knelt down in front of her so that he could clearly see the injuries and help revive them as soon as possible. He knew how to administer first aid, so this did not cause him any difficulty. The whole process took no more than 5 minutes. When he was done, he raised his head to look at Emily. A wide smile was visible on her face. "Emily, do you feel better?" "To be honest, Stephen, not really." "Then why are you smiling?" "I just noticed that when you were treating my knee with hydrogen peroxide and then smearing it with green, you were blowing on my knee like it was the most precious thing in your life." "Well, maybe not the most precious, but the most beautiful," Stephen thought, stretched into a smile. "Emily, it's just that I cause you a lot of trouble and pain. I tried very hard to make sure the procedure didn't cause you any discomfort. I hope I did the right thing, so that when you see me, you won't be reminded of this horrible incident." We exchanged a few words. The young people noticed that they were already 30 minutes late for their class. To keep the rumors from spreading around the school, Stephen sent Smith Emily first. When she left, the young man gathered all his things, left the office, and was about to close the door so that the nurse, who would soon be back in place, would not notice anything. "I'm embarrassed to ask, what's going on here?" Out of consternation, the nail squirrel he had taken from Emily fell out of Stephen's hands. Turning around, he noticed a stout adult woman in a white coat standing in front of him. It was obvious that she was a nurse. Stephen tried to think of a story that would make the woman feel comfortable with Emily's blood on the cuffs of his shirt. It was a good excuse to tell the nurse, a heart-wrenching situation that had his blood pressure rising. His nose was bleeding, and the staff at the nurse's station was not on site. By the look on the woman's face, you could tell right away that she didn't really believe the story. But she had little choice if she'd made a scandal of it. And the young man's bleeding was real. She could have been fired for leaving her workplace waving him off. She let him go. Stephen ran into the auditorium like a sunburned man. A look of surprise was written on the faces of the students. Occasional chuckles were heard around the auditorium. The young instructor was embarrassed for his students to witness this horror of a low embarrassment with Emily Smith. He had no choice but to pretend as if nothing had happened. In today's lecture, he was extremely serious. This was unusual for the students because Stephen was usually known around the institute for his good sense of humor, loyalty, and kindness. When the class was over, Stephen turned his back to the students and told them they were free to go. He was very embarrassed about what had happened before class. He did not turn around until the footsteps in the classroom stopped. When he was convinced that the students had left the room, he turned around, hoping that he would be getting ready now. To his surprise, standing in front of the faculty table was Smith, Emily with her big blue eyes. She looked at Stephen. "Later, Emily, I am so embarrassed. You will please forgive me again for everything. Why did you stay in the auditorium? I can help you with something." "Stephen, stop worrying. It's all behind you now, especially since you did a very professional job on my knee." At that moment, both Emily and Stephen smiled sincerely at each other, which made both of them uncomfortable. "So anyway, what can I do for you? You know, I've never acted like this in my life. There's something I'd like to tell you more than anything. I don't know how you're gonna react to it, but still." Stephen's heart was pumping at a frantic pace. He didn't understand what was happening to him, and why this student bothered him so much. Emily lowered her eyes to the floor, took a deep breath, and said, "Stephen, would you like to invite me in for a cup of coffee?" "What? So it's just like that? What makes her think I'd even want to ask her out? I don't know if I would or not. Who am I kidding? Emily, this is very sudden. And yet I have to ask you if it bothers you that you're a student and I'm a teacher. I'm almost 10 years older than you." "Oh no, it doesn't bother me at all. I just feel like you and I are soulmates. I'd like to get to know you as well as I can. I don't insist that we must have a relationship, just a chat." After these words, Emily's appearance was so innocent that Stephen could not refuse her. To tell the truth, he himself would like to get to know his student better. Even though the rules of the university contradicted it, Stephen looked at the girl with a bewildered look, and at some point realized that an idiotic smile was shining on his face. Quickly switching from Emily to his notes, he took 3 deep breaths, which, according to psychological practice, promised to bring calmness. "To be honest, this is very unexpected, I'll admit to you. I do feel, as you do, that we have much in common. So I'd love to invite you in for a cup of coffee or tea, whichever you prefer. But here's the thing. I don't get off until 7:00 p.m. every day. That's not a problem. Then I suggest we meet at 8:00 at the entrance to the city park. There's a good coffee shop nearby. The coffee's really good, and so are the desserts. It's great. I'd really like desserts. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye." After saying that, the girl turned around and left, with a quick limp. Stephen, it was very painful to look at her. He kept blaming himself for what he had done. In his mind, it seemed as if he had agreed to this meeting only because he was the one responsible for her broken knees. He wanted to do as many nice things for this girl as possible that would help make up for his guilt. Toward the end of the workday, the young man sat in the department and checked the students' papers. There was no one around. In his head, there were some rambling thoughts that distracted him from his work. Because of this, he had to check the control papers several times to find mistakes that were not detected at the first check. This feeling was new to him. His heart was failing him too. No, it wasn't aching. It was pounding at a frantic pace. It seemed to him that if anyone else were in the office, he would hear his heartbeat, which sounded like a drum solo in his head. He put his left hand to his chest. It seemed to him that it would make things better. Stephen was confused. Pens and pencils were falling out of his hands. Maybe I have poems by a chord and I never knew. I should ask for an excuse to go to the dean's office and make a doctor's appointment. His hand was already reaching for the work first aid kit to take a Validol or Corvalol. Just in time, he remembered he had a date with Emily. What date? Am I crazy? It's just a meeting. We're just gonna talk, have coffee, and I have to pay for it. I have to pay for her, but she might see it as a date. Stephen realized that he couldn't cope with the excitement and this new feeling, so he decided to quit. After all, he'd have time to check the tests tomorrow morning. It was early 8:00 on the clock. Time to move out. Stephen collected all the student work, his notes and briefcase, listed in front of the mirror, and went to the exit. In the corridor met the dean, who detained him. Their conversation about upcoming competitions and grants took over 20 minutes. Because of this, Stephen was catastrophically late for his meeting with Emily. The young man hailed a cab, which arrived 5 minutes later. Jumping into the car, he gave the driver the address and leaned back in the back seat. The closer he drove to the city park, the more his heartbeat increased. Stephen absent-mindedly considered the possibility that he was really sick. When he got out of the car, Emily was already waiting for him near the entrance to the park. With each step, he found it harder to breathe. It was getting harder. His heart was pounding harder and harder. At some point, his throat lumped up, and he couldn't even say hello to the girl. He had to react quickly. So instead of the usual greeting, he extended his right hand to the girl, and with his left hand he pretended to take off his hat. This made Emily laugh a lot. As she started up in a golden laugh, Stephen noticed that he was relieved. Stephen and Emily headed deeper into the park along the center avenue. For the first few minutes, they walked in complete silence, which made them both feel awkward. At some point, the girl began to talk about her hobbies. Stephen was very pleased with the fact that she liked to read books. As it turned out, young people have the same tastes. They almost simultaneously read all the novelties that appear in the bookstore. In addition, Emily told how she began to engage in drawing. Stephen did not hear anything original, but this did not prevent him from listening to the girl with interest since childhood. Emily liked to draw with pencils, colors with felt-tip pens. Sometimes there was not even enough paper for all her masterpieces, which she produced in a day. That's why the little girl used as a canvas everything she could get her hands on: documents, curtains, mirrors, windows, and even bed linen. Emily told her life stories with such a childlike sincerity, which instantly allowed her to draw the young teacher to her. All the while, a smile never left Stephen's face. It had been a long time since he had felt so good. One could even say that he was happy, really happy. He felt as if he had not lived before, but existed. He couldn't get out of his head why he was attracted to this girl. It could not be said that she was some kind of model appearance. After all, according to the stories of friends, this is what they pay attention to when meeting the opposite sex. Stephen was pleased to listen to Emily. He did not want to interrupt her. The last thing he wanted was for this evening to end. The young man realized that sooner or later he would have to talk and tell something about himself, and she was waiting for that. But he dared not interrupt Emily and tell her about his life. And what did he have to tell about how he lived with his mother in a 3-room apartment in the center of the city? How his mother wouldn't let him take a step without her permission. He was ashamed. He didn't want Emily to get the impression that he was a mama's boy. He wasn't. He tried to fight the matriarchy in the house, but he wasn't very good at it. And instead of the sweet feeling of victory after an argument with his mother, he constantly felt guilty. Especially when Camille clutched at her heart and screamed that Stephen was trying to drive her to her grave. God, I don't even have anything to say about my life. After 2 o'clock, it started to get colder outside, so the young people decided to stop by the coffee shop Stephen had talked about during the day. They were both surprised that their orders were the same: Cocoa and Napoleon. Were you peeking at my order? Emily shrieked sharply, theatrically putting her hands at her sides. No, you were watching me, young lady, replied Stephen, laughing. Laughing, Stephen replied. I'm not. Where did you find a young lady? I'm a grown-up, independent, and self-sufficient woman. Of course, my father didn't want me to move so far away from my parents' home. It was my choice. I've been living in your city for 3 years, and I've never asked my parents for money. I make my own living. It's not much, but I'm sure that in the future my work will be appreciated, and I'll be able to live well. Okay, I'm sure. I'm just kidding. Don't mind me. Stephen, I've noticed that the 2.5 hours we spend together, I'm the only one talking. Can you please tell me something about yourself? Stephen agreed. But did he have a choice? The young man said that since childhood he had been drawn to knowledge, that his father had accustomed him to books, and now he could not spend a single evening without reading. He did not talk about the fact that everything was not smooth in his family. Emily didn't need to know that Stephen's parents were divorced and his mother couldn't stand his father. And she certainly didn't need to learn that her mother's main job, in her opinion, was to arrange for her son's matchmaking and marriage. The young teacher was quickly going over in her head the topics on which to talk. When there were pauses, Emily tried to ask leading questions on topics of interest to her. It was by chance that she learned that Stephen had decided to follow in his father's footsteps. It turned out that Christopher was known even in the city where the girl came from. She was pleasantly surprised, as she had read in the newspaper's interviews with the outstanding engineer. She especially liked Christopher's articles on various subjects. Stephen was very much surprised that Emily was aware of who his father was. It turned out that she even knew that Christopher and Camille were divorced. Stephen's dad had mentioned it in passing in some interview. At some point, the young teacher felt an irresistible urge to take the girl's hand, but he couldn't afford it, as they had to observe the elementary subordination. To be honest, he was a little shaken at the thought that they might be seen by students or professors from the institute. If they thought something untoward was going on, Stephen would lose his job. It was obvious to Emily that she was very eager to touch the young man. She tried to touch him in every possible way, supposedly by accident. In the coffee shop, the young people spent another hour and a half. It was already about 23 o'clock on the clock. Stephen said that the time had passed catastrophically unnoticed and suggested Emily to go away. Yes, you're probably right. But Stephen, don't you know it's etiquette for a young man to walk a girl home? What? Oh yes, but you see, Emily, it's only permissible if there are romantic feelings between a man and a woman. And you don't. At that moment, Stephen was lost. Never before in his life had a girl behaved so openly in his presence. Where had he ever seen a woman declare all her desires at the first meeting? He didn't know what to do in this situation. He wanted very much to walk Emily home. But this prim pedantry prevented him from agreeing to this adventure. Where do you live? It's not far. Come along. To his surprise, the young man obeyed Emily. When they left the park, they turned into Dark Lane. The girl reached timidly with her fingers for Stephen's hand. To say that he was discouraged was like saying nothing. His hand remained unmoved while Emily's fingers gently stroked his. At the same time, they did not speak, walked in silence. Words were unnecessary here. Emily's heart was beating in a frantic rhythm. She had never acted so unbridled in her life. She felt as if she were scaring the young teacher away from her, but she didn't want that. She wanted to get closer to him. A wave of passion and attraction was washing over her. She became a hostage to her heart. Emily was willing to do anything to make Stephen respond to her actions. What scared her most in life was rejection. Rejection of her. The girl, like Stephen, had never been in a serious relationship. It seemed to her, too, that the men around her thought more of their animal instincts. Intimacy with the opposite sex was intimidating. But things were different with this guy. Stephen was still walking the same way, frozen. Fear. Only fear kept him from responding to Emily's actions. It was hard for him to explain where the feeling came from and what exactly he was afraid of. It could have been misunderstanding from the mother of the people around him, coworkers and students. Yes, it could have been judgment from the outside that he would not want to experience. Meanwhile, Emily's actions became more confident. She went wa the bank. The girl decided that she had nothing to lose, and it was now that everything should be decided. If the young and attractive teacher did not respond to her already far from timid actions, she would let him go. It was clear from the student's fingers what she wanted. Stephen stopped squeezing her hand, whereupon his fingers tangled with Emily's slender, neat fingers. This was the moment when the young people realized that they cared about each other. Stephen, are you comfortable? Yes, but I'm not. Emily, why not? I think our atmosphere would be more favorable if we switched to you. I don't know. Do you think it's appropriate? After all, we're faculty. Student. Yes, it is. But we're not in lecture. We're not in counseling. We're actually on a date. I thought we were meeting to get to know each other. We are. But we originally met because we have some warm feelings for each other that shouldn't be between a teacher and a student. Stephen was lying to himself when he talked about not feeling anything for Emily. His heart and body spoke of something else. This was the only girl he was comfortable with, and he had decided to risk his relationship with his mother, work in science, and teaching. At that very moment, he didn't care about anything but this young and awe-inspiring creature holding his hand. No longer did the young people address each other in you. Their hands clasped each other more tightly, and when Stephen took Emily home, he did not want to let her go. Emily felt the same way, and she wanted very much to invite Stephen to her house. But the fear that the young man would misunderstand her took over. When they reached the entrance, they stopped. Emily, without letting go of his hand, turned to the boy. For several minutes they stared into each other's eyes. It was hard to tell what they saw in them. It's not for nothing they say that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. Stephen still stood in confusion. He didn't know what to do next. They should have said goodbye a long time ago, gone their separate ways. But the girl and the man looked into each other's eyes and held hands without a break. At some point, Emily realized that she had to act first. She stood on her tiptoes a little and reached for Stephen's face. At that moment, his brain shut down. He reflexively reached up, and their lips met. At first, it was a gentle, childlike kiss, but with each passing second, the passion increased, and their lips greedily embraced each other. Tums unapologetically entered another space, exploring the terrain. When the kiss ended, Stephen said it was getting late. He hugged Emily goodbye, and they parted. The young man lived not far from the student. On the way home, he was in high spirits. Had Stephen met someone he was ready to go on with? How can it be that two people with the same interests, views on life met only now? Let's be honest, it wasn't the best of circumstances. But Stephen waved goodbye to everything, just to feel happy for a moment. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a girl standing under the visor. It was a strange phenomenon, as it was already approaching 0 o'clock. As he took a few more steps closer, he saw Jenna standing near the door. "Jenna, hello. What are you doing here?" "Oh, Stephen, you don't know how long I've been waiting here for you. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd come to visit, but there was no one home, so I thought I'd wait for you here." The young man was very much surprised. If someone passes by the house and decides to visit, and there is no one there, he just turns around and leaves. But why did she stay here? Why is she waiting for him? "How long have you been waiting for me?" "You know, I thought it hadn't been more than half an hour, but it's been almost 2 o'clock. 200 waiting. You really must have something going on." "No, I just really wanted to see you." "I'm honored." "Thank you." Stephen felt uncomfortable. He realized he liked Jenna, but he didn't feel the same way. "So are we just gonna stand here like this?" "You will." "Jenna, it's too late. I have to check the students' test papers. I promised I'd announce their results tomorrow. Perhaps you should go home." "I'm sorry you waited so long for me." "Stephen, but I think they won't be offended if you don't announce the grades. If you tell them that you spent that time with a pretty girl you like, they'll understand your position and take it all in stride." "Yeah, except I'd be lying." "What do you mean?" "Jenna, I'm sorry, you're a very nice girl, aren't you? But under the circumstances, if you and I had met without the help of our parents, maybe something would have happened between us. But under these circumstances, there can't be any relationship between us. I can't say I don't like you. I like you, but as a friend. A friend is just a friend. Think about it. We can have a beautiful family. We're not the last people in this town. We're very promising. If we get married, we'll go abroad together, and they'll take good engineers." "Jenna, wait, we haven't even been on a date yet. That's unnecessary. We're modern people living in the 21st century. No, I'm sorry. I just want to get this conversation over with as soon as possible. If my mom promised you something, you can have it. Don't bring me into this. I'm going home now. You call a cab and leave. Please don't ever come here again." After these words, Stephen turned away and entered the entrance, going up to his floor. His thoughts stayed in his head. He had never been so hard on other people before. Always went along to get along, but not this time. And he realized why things were happening this way. It's Emily's fault, or rather, it was her fault for what she had done to his heart and head. Entering the apartment, Stephen was surprised. The TV was on and his mom was lying on the couch. "Mom, hi, I'm home." "Oh, Stephen, I've been waiting for you for so long. Where have you been?" "Oh, wait, let me guess. You were with Jenna. How was the date?" "I don't know who Jenna is." "What date?" "You weren't with her. Where were you? Did you even see the time?" "You don't care if your mom's at home worrying. You were worried sick when you thought I was with Jenna. That's why you were so excited to see me." "Oh, I see. I guess Jenna didn't wait for you." "How do you know she waited for me?" "Someone rang the doorbell while you were out. I went over, looked through the peephole, saw Jenna there. To be honest, at first I didn't want to open the door because I wasn't at my best. But the girl was very persistent. Eventually, I let her into the apartment, and we talked. She said she really wanted to see you, and that she liked you. To be honest, I was really excited, because, as I said before, this is a very good match for your future wife." "Mom, let's just leave it at that. What happened next?" "Well, I told her you were due back from school soon. I suggested that she wait for you downstairs. I thought when you saw her, you'd be pleased. But apparently I miscalculated. Yes, I sent her away and asked her never to come here again." "What? How dare you? Do you realize whose daughter she is? She'll never forgive you after that." "Stephen, who needs you at your age? Whoever needs you, needs you." "I don't get it." "With your eyebrows together?" Camille asked. "Can I ask you more about that?" Stephen decided to tell his mom the truth. Maybe then she would leave him alone. The young man told Camille that a girl had come into his life. They have many common interests and feel an irresistible attraction to each other. During the heightened narrative, Camille's face was constantly changing. Such colorful emotions that changed every minute he had never seen before. He did not know how his mother would react to all this. He didn't feel like fighting. However, the feeling of dread that lodged in his chest said otherwise. His stomach grumbled as if he hadn't eaten in 3 days. After listening to Stephen, Camille threw her hands up in the air and threw a real tantrum. It had to be admitted that she had gotten into the wrong school at the wrong time. She should definitely have tried her luck in the acting department. Camille was the person for whom Oscar cried. And she cried. She screamed. She was silent. She pretended to gasp. She was trying to get it into Stephen's head that this was his biggest mistake in life. After all he had done, he would not be forgiven by the young girl and her parents. The mother was trying to prove to her son that you can't be so irresponsible with life. Do you understand? I can see it in your eyes. Stephen, a few years ago, you chose your profession responsibly. You thought through all your options. Your specialty is one of the most promising. Not as promising as a programmer, of course, but still you chose it yourself. I'm sure you were guided not by your heart, but by your brain. You should do the same with choosing a future wife. What are you doing, son? You chased away such a beautiful girl, and instead walks with some frame who came from a neighboring town. Don't you realize she's trying to get a job here on your dime? At our expense. Stephen's got his wits about him. Even though Stephen hadn't taken his mother's words seriously for a long time, for some reason he thought about what she had said now. Because right now, Camille could be right. He didn't know anything about Emily. Why was she so keenly interested in a young teacher? Yes, she probably just wants to find a free place to live, earn an automatic in electrical engineering. No, this is a pure and sincere person. She can't do that. Or can she? The scandal went on for no more than another 10 minutes. At some point, Stephen realized that he had reached an impasse. He needed to think it over, to make the right decision. But he didn't know who to ask. What exactly would be considered the right decision? In his head, the thoughts scattered smoothly in different directions formed a void. Silence. Stephen fell asleep. The next day, when Stephen woke up, he found that his throat was sore. On top of that, his temperature was elevated to 38.5. His whole body ached, as if he had been ponderously beaten all night. One thing was clear: he would not be going to work today. At first he was upset because he wouldn't be seeing Emily. Then he decided that it was a good opportunity to think things over properly and make the right decision. He called the department chair, alerted the dean, and made an appointment with the doctor. Stephen realized that the doctor would definitely give him a sick leave, which would last at least 10 days. Yes, that would be enough time. Camille was not at home. She had gone somewhere early in the morning, probably to the market for fresh vegetables. He went to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. It was not far from his house, literally 30 meters away. When Stephen was on his way to the entrance, he looked up and saw Emily near the steps. He wasn't surprised. He just didn't have the energy for it. He didn't understand why the women were following him. Why had Emily come here? The girl stood in a light floral dress just above the knee. On her shoulder was a pink bag, and in her hands a branded bag from the store, in which oranges were visible. Stephen, hi. How are you? I was really freaked out today when Jack showed up for steam instead of you. I thought something serious had happened. I ran to the department, but the secretary said you were ill. I hope it's nothing serious. Hello, Emily. Well, I don't know how serious it is, but I have a sore throat. It's a lousy condition, of course. Why did you come here? What do you mean? To check on you, to give you an orange so you can get vitamins and get well soon. I missed you. At that moment, the girl raised her eyes to Stephen a few times, playfully clapped her eyelashes, and pouted her lips. Emily, you forgive me, but what are you apologizing for again? I really don't have the energy. I don't know what happened yesterday. I've never been through anything like this before in my life, so I need time to think. Think about what? Emily asked in surprise. I'd like to take charge of yesterday's situation. Why did that happen? Why do I have these feelings for you? Why are you so open with me? Why are you so assertive after all? These are the kind of questions that are sitting in my head right now. You know, there must be a catch, but I can't see it. You attract me like a magnet. I've never had that in my life. I'll tell you the truth. I'd like to hold your hands for the rest of my life and never let go. It's like you've been stealing from me. If we lived 300 years ago, I'd really think you were engaging in hostile behavior. What are you talking about? Tears began to well up in Emily's eyes. She could no longer keep a steady, calm voice. She was shaking. What fight? I opened up to you. I gave you the key to my heart. Did you use it? Entered the hearts. Now you want to break it. No, Emily, I'm just not familiar with this whole thing. I'm scared, to be honest. Stephen wouldn't tell the girl that her mother was against their relationship. He didn't think it was information that deserved her attention. They looked at each other in silence for a few minutes. Stephen was pained to see the tears in Emily's eyes. He stretched his arms forward and spread them slightly apart, letting the girl know that he was ready to hug her. She instantly responded to his call, snuggled against his chest, and catted his neck with her arms. It so happened that Emily had received a stab in the heart in 15 minutes, and then a fit of tenderness and revelation from Stephen. She knew what he was talking about. After all, she had experienced the same thing. Despite this, she truly believed that the feeling that was spilling inside of her was the truest love. This little conversation with Emily helped Stephen forget the tantrum his mother had thrown. There was no going back to that conversation. Apparently, she was confident that her son had listened to her. The young man was on sick leave for 10 days. His mom was with him only in the evenings. During the day, Stephen was visited by Emily, who told him news from the Institute local gossip and also shared impressions of the lectures that Jack held. One of the days, Camille was at work. Emily, as always, after studying, approached the entrance of Stephen. The young man was waiting for her at the same time every day. They didn't need to call each other. They felt each other. Seeing a familiar silhouette approaching in the window, Stephen ran out of the apartment, ran up the stairs, came out of the entrance exactly at the moment when Emily was 3 meters away from him. The girl joyfully pounced on Stephen, kissed his cheeks, eyes, nose, smoothly moving to his lips. While Stephen was on sick leave, he didn't want them to kiss, afraid of infecting Emily. But she didn't care. She confirmed that contagion doesn't stick to advance. Afterwards, she laughed and pounced on his lips as if she hadn't seen them in forever. During the passionate kiss, the young people did not notice anything around them. The gray cityscape turned into the natural world, always becomes much brighter when a loved one is near us. Yes, it was the beloved Stephen who confessed his feelings to Emily on the 3rd day of the hospital stay. This fact did not shock her. She, of course, reciprocated his feelings. Even though they had only known each other for a week, both of them were sure that this love was for life, and they wanted to get married as soon as possible. Emily was already prepared for the fact that the proposal would be made not by Stephen to her, but by her to him. But still, she was waiting for a man to take that step. Camille spent a lot of time at work, tried to lead a social life, but that day she was ashamed of the fact that at home there is a sick son who needs her care, and she instead has fun with girlfriends. After quickly saying goodbye, the woman gathered all her things. She ran to the store to buy groceries to prepare a delicious dinner. She wanted to give her son a little feast. She hurried home with all her legs, and when she wrapped up in her yard, she saw that under the driveway young people hugging, kissing. Wow, they couldn't find any other place. How are people supposed to walk? She did not want to scandalize, as she was in a good mood, and decided to make a simple remark. "Guys, why are you standing here in broad daylight in full view of everyone?" Camille said without raising her eyes, and ran into the entrance. "Mom, meet Emily." Camille was dumbfounded. She thought she had imagined it. Standing there, afraid to turn around, she couldn't believe it. After all, her son was sick, should be lying in bed waiting for her. "Mom," without letting go of Emily's embrace, repeated Stephen. "Why aren't you in bed?" Stephen released his lover from his embrace, walked up to his mother, took her by the elbow, and took her aside. "I don't understand. What kind of concerts are these? What do you allow yourself? I'm introducing you to a dear person, and you act like she's not even there. How am I supposed to act? Should I welcome her with open arms? Who is she? She's nobody. Look at the way the girl looks. Would an intelligent person wear such a vulgar dress? And what's that on her head? It's horrible. Where did you find her? Did you pick her up like a slit in a garbage dump?" After these words, Stephen was overcome by a wave of rage. No one dare speak of his favorite person in such a tone. His hand twitched, barely missed. The young man came to his senses. Raising a hand on his mother is not allowed, and in general on anyone. Stephen turned around and walked towards Emily. His face had never looked so ugly with anger. Emily was frightened. Stepping up close, Stephen grabbed the girl's arm so that she shrieked a little. The reaction was one of fear and pain. His hand clenched tighter. The guy didn't see anyone or anything around him. Only when Emily started to cry did he abruptly let her go. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to." The girl broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. No one had ever treated her like this before. She didn't understand why it had happened. After all, she had done nothing wrong. Tears were flowing not only because Stephen had grabbed her and hurt her, but also because of Camille's reaction. "Honey, please don't cry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't know what I was doing. She just made me angry," Stephen said, pointing in the direction where his mother was standing. "Why is she angry without stopping to cry?" asked Emily. "I don't know. She doesn't need an excuse to turn into Miguel." Stephen cradled Emily, kissed the top of her head. There was a lump in my throat again, this guilt that wouldn't let up. Her heartbeat quickened with anxiety. Nausea kicked in. The young man was determined. Sweetheart, it's going to be all right. I'll do everything I can to make us happy. We just have to wait a little longer. Do you believe me? I do, darling. I do. The lovers stayed together for about another hour. After that, Stephen saw the girl off and went home to talk to his mom and start forging his own happiness. God, I really am a mama's boy. I'm almost 30 years old, and I still haven't learned to live on my own, to make my own decisions. I have to figure out something to make my girl happy, to make me happy. After all, how to talk to her mother. I have no idea what language I can use to convey my thoughts to her. Doesn't she want her son to be happy? Every mother wants that. She just doesn't understand me because we haven't talked enough. I just need to spend a nice evening with her. Stephen thought that today he could settle the relationship with his mother, which had not been formed for many years, to immediately flush her Zamomu. So to speak, the young man on the way home stopped by the flower store. On the shelves of the refrigerator were dozens of vases with a variety of flowers. But Camille's most favorite plants were chrysanthemums. There was no preference of any kind for the color. At first, Stephen wanted to collect all varieties of these flowers in a bouquet, but thought that it would look like something defiant. Mom's nervous system was already upset. Together with the salesman, they chose chrysanthemums in bed colors. The bouquet was chic and expensive, but Stephen spared no expense. It was for his beloved mom. To be more precise, it's for his carefree future. The bouquet was just under a meter in diameter. When Stephen saw it, he thought he couldn't carry it home on his own. But it was necessary to walk less than 500 meters. Entering the entrance, the young man stopped and leaned against the wall. His arms were tired, his back grimaced. There was not much left to do. Gathering all the strength in a heap, Stephen made one last dash. The door to the apartment was locked. It was impossible to hold the keys. It was impossible to reach, as he held the bouquet with both hands. I had to knock. The choice fell on his foot, gently hitting the door a few times. Stephen froze in anticipation of footsteps not being heard. Tried again. Silence. With all his might, hitting the door, he heard quick footsteps. What on earth is going on? Mumbled Camille as he ran to the door and turned the lock. Why are you banging like that? Are you out of your mind? Oops, when the door opened, she saw a huge bouquet of her favorite flowers. What's that? Who is it? Blurry smiles, asked the woman. It's for you, Mom. I tried and picked the best flowers for you. We had an unpleasant conversation this afternoon. You were in a bad mood. I thought I'd make it better for you. Did it work? I'm glad you came to your senses and admitted you were wrong. Mom, that's not what I meant. Why was I wrong? Let's go into the kitchen and have some tea. Put the flowers in the vase. Camille grabbed the bouquet and went into the hall with it. There among the variety of you tried to choose the one in which the bouquet would look more advantageous. Meanwhile, Sturhenna's head was busy thinking about how to convince his mother to leave him alone. It seemed impossible, but he wasn't going to give up. Dialogues were turning in his head, which by all the rules of life would never happen. Even if you think of many variants of the event, it will still turn out something you did not count on. Oh, son, that's good. You made your mom happy, of course. Thank you so much. My favorite colors and shades are so beautiful. After all, a mother is never wrong. I always said you had good taste. It's just that after I saw your mom, I started to doubt you. But I figured it was just a temporary blur. Mom, stop calling love a blur. What love? What do you know about love? You're almost 30 years old, but you've never had a girlfriend. How do you know? Oh, I'm sorry. Camille shrieked and threw her hands up in the air. Did you sit in your room all day or did you disappear to the institute? And where did you hide it if you had it under your desk, under your bed? Okay, everybody. Let's stop this pointless conversation. I wanted to talk to you about my relationship with Emily. Oh my God, what relationship with Emily? Please, it's just a casual attraction. Son, now, after a couple nights together, you'll forget her as the most interesting book you have on your bottom shelf, floor-level shelves. You won't even lose dust in there. That's how it's gonna be with this sucker. No, you listen to me. You know, I've never felt what I'm feeling right now in my life. No girl has ever captured my attention and captured my mind and my heart. You see, she and I are soulmates. We have a lot in common. A love of art, books, animals. Can you understand what I'm saying? I'm asking you to stop following my every move and let me start living on my own. If you are afraid that I don't make mistakes, then don't worry. They will be my mistakes that I will learn from. You've hardly lived the life your grandmother told you to live. As far as I remember from your childhood, you were always willful, and never in your life did you do as your grandmother told you. You did the opposite. Even when you knew it wouldn't end well, you did it out of spite. Just think about the time I was at my grandmother's house this weekend. And when I met you, she said I was probably allergic to citrus fruits. You screamed that it wasn't true. And the rash that formed on me is common. That same evening, you fed me oranges. And 2 o'clock later, I was in the hospital with a pharmacy receipt. That's not normal. But you thought you did the right thing, because you had to see if Granny was right or not. Camille listened and stared intently into Stephen's eyes. She couldn't believe that her son remembered this moment in his life, because he was only 4 years old. And after being discharged from the hospital, no one ever brought up the situation. And even now, my mom didn't feel guilty. It was a good thing after all. What else does he need? What kind of independence can we talk about if Stephen did not live a day without his mom? He even refused to go to camps because he was afraid of a long separation from his mother. Stephen continued his monologue, trying to make many arguments for the fact that he was ready to get off the tit and go into life without his mom. Camille realized that the son was serious. The usual methods of influencing him would not work. There was no point in throwing another tantrum. A more cunning plan could have been devised. Stephen was more loyal to his mother when she spoke in a calm and affirmative tone. But even that was not enough now. If she kept talking about her son's failure as an independent man, he would become hysterical, and God forbid, he would get angry and leave home. Such a turn of events she did not survive, having listened to her son to the end. The mother remained silent for a few minutes, trying to digest what he was trying to convey to her. Stephen, you're probably right. What's right? You're a grown man who needs to get out of your parents' house and start building your life brick by brick. Stephen was stunned. He was preparing for the fact that his mother will seize another scandal, will argue that he cannot live without her, and that he needed a wife. But to say that Camille would agree with her son's words, no one could expect that. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye, groped his hand several times to make sure it wasn't a dream. The young man rushed from his seat, hugging his mother. The woman answered him gently, hugging and stroking her son. Only I ask you for one thing. Mother, I will try to do what you ask. There is nothing terrifying in my request. You see, I'm used to you always being at home, putting up with the enormous amount of books that keeps increasing. I can't imagine coming home from work tomorrow, and the house will be empty, with neither you nor your things in it. I wouldn't survive that. All I ask is that you don't rush into moving. Stay with me a little longer. This mother's request was out of Stephen's plans. He was really going to look for a nice apartment tonight, among the ones for rent. He wanted to drive around in the morning, see what was available. Then tonight he'd pack up his things and move in. After that, he'd like to go after Emily and ask her to move in with him. But Mom was partly right about something. She carried him for 9 months under her heart for 29 years, raising him, feeding him, caring for him. If he did that, her feelings would probably be comparable to what women feel when they lose their children. Okay, Mom, I'll do what you're asking me to do. I just ask that this transition not take months. The most I can offer you is a few weeks. I'm fine with that. Son, thank you. Although Camille agreed with everything that had been said, she had no intention of stopping. It was early in the morning when Stephen was asleep. She took his phone, found his lover's phone number, wrote it down in her notebook. Toward lunchtime, she decided to call. Hello. She heard a fragile female voice on the other end of the line. Smith. Emily. Yes. Hi, this is Camille, Stephen's mom. I'd like to meet you today. Something's happened to Stephen. The girl asked me worriedly. No, he's sleeping fine. He probably had a fever last night, couldn't sleep. And if he had followed the bed rest that the doctor said, he would have recovered by now. Oh well, that's not what I'm talking about. When can you honor me with your presence? I'm out of class in half an hour. We can meet outside the institute. There's a coffee shop with great coffee. Oh, that's great. I'll be there in 5 minutes. When Emily finished talking, I noticed that she was feeling a little heavy. The feeling of unease was growing by the second. After what Camille had done in the yard yesterday, the girl could not expect her to be kind. What if Stephen had talked to her and the woman had decided to get to know her better to understand her son's choice? Yeah, I guess she did. It's weird, but why am I so excited? Although it can be considered the first acquaintance with the future mother-in-law, no daughter-in-law has ever been completely calm before this event. I guess it's a normal feeling. Emily returned to the classroom, where the class was held, began to absorb what was written on the teachers' websites. Thoughts did not leave her head. It was impossible to concentrate. No matter how hard the girl tried to concentrate, everything was in vain. She resigned herself to her condition and just stared at the clock, waiting for the end of the class. After the bell rang, the instructor dismissed the students. Emily leisurely headed towards the exit. She did not want to hurry, because the feeling of anxiety had already grown to universal proportions. The way to the cafe, which was located in the park, 200 meters from the institute, took forever. There she saw the familiar silhouette of a middle-aged lady. Yes, it was her. Maybe it's not too late to cancel. If I go now and leave before she saw me, it could be said that I was detained after the lecture. While Emily was turning an escape plan in her head, Camille turned around and saw her. The girl stood there like a dumbfounded and didn't understand what she should do, where to run to. Maybe she hadn't noticed her yet. The woman gracefully raised her hand and waved everything. There were no more options. If she ran away now, it would mean she would completely ruin her relationship with her lover's mom. Emily shifted with difficulty. Her legs were leaden. Every step was like torture. When the girl came close, it felt as if she was about to faint. "Hello, Emily." "Hello, Camille." Stammering, the girl replied. "Let's go to the cafe." They were both silent until they sat down at a table. After ordering, the woman spoke. "Emily, you know, I'm very glad that my son has you. I honestly thought he was more interested in the book world than the real world. I don't know what's so special about you, but I'm happy he's starting to live. But all people are unique and beautiful in their own way. Some people can't understand another person's choices. Yeah, you're right. You must be able to do something my son never dreamed of before," Camille said with a wry smile. Emily felt uncomfortable. How dare this woman say such things to her? She was clearly alluding to sex and everything that went with it. The snag was that the young people had nothing going on yet. Yes, that's what happens in the modern world when a woman doesn't jump on a man in the first hour of meeting him. It was more than that. "Camille, I'm sorry, but it's indecent to talk about such things. And if it bothers you that much, yes, I care a great deal." Stephen's mother started to raise her voice. "There was nothing going on between me and Stephen yet." "Yeah, but all the better." "What do you mean?" "That he won't be in so much pain after the breakup. You see, my dear, if there's been intimacy between young people, there's a special bond between them. I'm sorry. After what breakup? What are you talking about?" "That's what I called you here to talk to you about. Honey, you're not our kind of girl. I figured you out when I first heard about you, and when I saw you, all my fears were confirmed. Stephen is the son of a great, not afraid of this word, engineer known not only in Russia, but in many countries of the world. He's an intelligent boy, you know. And now look at yourself." At that moment, Emily turned her head to the right. There on the wall was a mirror. She looked at her reflection saw exactly what she had seen an hour and a half ago. Maybe her mascara was running. I don't think so. Camille, I look at myself in the mirror 100 times a day. I don't see any signs of ugliness, sty, or inferiority. Appearance. I'm wearing a flowered dress on my head. What are you? A milkmaid? I guess I'm guessing. Before you went to college, by some miracle you ate cows in your village. No. I came from a regional town, Emily replied dryly. What, you didn't go to school in the region? You decided to come to a small town. What is that nonsense? Yes, I did. I wanted to get out of my parents' house, so I came here. Are you even telling the truth? I'm telling the truth. Why would I open up to someone I don't know very well? Plus, I'm happy with the way I look, just like your son. Oh, let's drop it. You're the one who's stupid. I'll continue, if you don't mind. You see, Stephen was only interested in you until he took you to bed. I'm sure that after he's had a few times of getting what he dreams of, all his made-up feelings, and vaporized, he won't need you. No one knows a child as well as his mother who has lived under the same roof with him all his life. Emily, I understand why you chose my son. He deserves the attention of the best women. Not that you're on that list, but still. Emily sat there, not moving. The coffee had gone cold. She couldn't get a word in edgewise. She did not understand how from the mouth of such a well-mannered woman, at first glance, could fly such disgusting words that she allowed herself. Why had she descended almost to direct insults? These questions lingered in her mind. She had no idea what was going on right now. Meanwhile, Camille continued her tirade. I'm sorry your plan didn't work out, but I must confess that Stephen already has a fiancée. But he's been very upset with her because of you. Well, I'm willing to bend at the knees to beg her forgiveness. His future is firmly entwined with the kitten, not you. Just suck it up and let him go. Just disappear. I realize that's impossible because he's your teacher. But think of something. I hope the villagers are logical and you'll make the right decision. After these words, Camille elegantly got up from the table, carefully threw her coat on her shoulders and left. Emily sat there, hardly breathing. What was that? And what am I supposed to do after that? The girl felt as if she had been doused in mud from head to toe. What is there to say? According to Stephen's mother, she was the dirt that could not be washed away. The woman considered her son's relationship with the girl as something criminal and ugly. I think it would stigmatize the boy for the rest of his life. Emily realized one thing: Stephen had a strong bond with his mother. Tears sprang from her eyes and wouldn't stop flowing. She didn't understand why the woman didn't accept her. She didn't even ask who her father and mother were, nor did she inquire about her reason for moving to the small town. As much as it hurt Emily, she had to make a difficult decision. The next day, Stephen woke up early in the morning, went to the bread store to get a loaf to please herself and her mother, delicious breakfast sandwiches. On his way back, he decided to check the mail. To his surprise, there was a letter there. It was unmarked, only in the middle of the envelope. One word, Stephen, was written in calligraphic handwriting. He couldn't help himself and tore the envelope open on the spot. It contained a letter from Emily. Hello, Stephen. I hope you are almost recovered. I'm sorry I didn't come by to check on you. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to hold back and shed tears on your t-shirt. I won't beat around the bush. Oh, around. I have to tell you that I'm leaving for my house at 500 hours today. It's an emergency. We need to end our relationship. I really do love you very much. I've never been so attracted to anyone before. I wondered why we hadn't met sooner. I came to the conclusion that it was the age difference, which, by the way, I didn't feel at all. It's just that when you were a young guy, I was on the potty. The day before, your mom called me and asked me to meet you. I said yes. If I'd known how this would turn out, I never would have agreed to it in my life. I've been dragged through the mud. I don't think I'll be able to feel normal for months. Camille tells me you already have a fiancé. I'll be honest, I hate to hear it from a stranger. She said I wasn't worthy of you. Well, so be it. Your mom thinks I was signed for self-interest. When I started a relationship with you, it was like I had my eye on your apartment. Honey, I'm gonna have to lay it all on the line. I didn't say anything about Camille last night because she was impossible to interrupt. I have a full family: Mom, Dad, me, and my sister. Mom works as a director of the best high school in the region. My sister studies at the same lyceum. My daddy is a regular governor. I think if your mom knew that, I'd be the best match she's got for you. It's my dad's status that made him hard on me. Everyone there knows me by sight, since our family photos are in the papers. So I decided to move to your town to be more free. But even there was a man who broke my wings. So I'd rather go back home. It hurts to say goodbye to you, but I don't see any other way out. I hope you can get away from your mother and make a life for yourself. Choose your own wife, job, and home. I wish you all the best. I hope you'll remember me with a kind word. I only ask one thing. Don't look for me. Don't try. I don't want us to have anything to do with each other. I'm not ready to build a family with a man and his mother. They shouldn't be on the same level. I still love you. Your fox on Emily. Stephen was devastated. While he was reading the letter, he didn't notice the button fall out of his hands and onto the coffee tile in the entryway. He didn't bother picking it up, clutching the letter in his hands, headed for his apartment. His mom was still asleep. He needed to think it over. The guy was very hurt. He did not expect such a turn of fate. He could not think that he and Emily would ever part. Only death could separate them. But things turned out very differently. Of course, he looked for someone to blame. In his opinion, it was both Emily and Camille. Mother had insolently meddled in their relationship, and Emily had betrayed him. Yes, she had betrayed him, because she could have told him who she was in the first place. Even though Stephen didn't care, it was important to his mother. If she had immediately found out who her father was, she would not have opposed their relationship at all. It wasn't until he was 30 that a guy got his heart broken for the first time. He realized it wasn't the only time. In his lifetime, it would be. But to minimize the risk, he'd have to make up his mind. Getting away from Camille wasn't easy. I have to move out right now. Full of determination, Stephen got up from the couch, went to the storage room where the suitcases were kept. He packed only the most necessary things and left his parents' house for nowhere. He decided that he would check into the first apartment he could find today. And if it didn't work out, he would temporarily move in with his father, who was on a business trip. Camille woke up half an hour later. After Stephen had left, there was a pleasant aroma of fried eggs in the apartment, the unfinished breakfast that the young man was preparing. Stephen tried to shout to her son, the woman. No one answered. She assumed the young man had gone to get bread and went into the kitchen to make coffee on the bar. Lying crumpled was a piece of paper. As she got closer, she realized it was a letter. Yes, reading other people's letters was not allowed. But Camille did not hold back. At first, there was a wide smile on her face. She was satisfied that she was able to achieve what she wanted. But near the end of the letter, her emotions changed. It was shock mixed with sadness. When she reached the end, Camille realized how much she had miscalculated. Emily was a willful girl, and she would never forgive a woman, no matter how much she begged, even if she got down on her knees. It wasn't until later that she realized she'd lost something important. She had lost her son. It was clear that he had left home. The woman rushed to the phone to dial him, but the caller was out of range. Tears flowed from her eyes. Camille had always been afraid that Stephen would move out on her. She had expected to live with him forever, even when he got married. However, things had turned out very differently. She was left alone and with nothing, like an old woman at a broken trough.
Subscribe and click the bell.
An early call on a Sunday morning can drive anyone crazy, and instantly. As much as Susan was always ready to help, she jumped up from her bachelor couch in a frenzy. She threw on a brightly colored silk robe that was about to slip off her shoulders and rushed to the door to pour all her indignation on the caller. Whoever the early visitor was, now he would get the full measure of it. But the girl had to not only hide her anger, but also to worry about the newcomer. In the hallway stood her best friend and part-time neighbor Helen. When Susan saw her face in the door peephole, she began to twist the lock with shaking hands, but as always in such cases, it did not open for some reason. Finally, Susan swung the door open and almost screamed in Helen's face. "What's wrong?" "Thomas isn't well." Helen looked at her friend in surprise. "He's fine. What are you doing?" Susan exhaled and invited her in. "Come in, since you haven't slept since 7 o'clock in the morning." Her friend's behavior was not quite usual. Usually she fell on the sofa near the table and waited for Susan to serve tea or make coffee. But Helen never stopped chatting, looking in the refrigerator for goodies and asking Susan questions. In short, she behaved as if she were at home. And today even her steps were slow, giving away the girl's embarrassment. "How are you?" she asked, not boldly, finally, after some fumbling on the sofa. "What do you mean, how?" Susan's eyes widened. "I was asleep, and you got up at the crack of dawn." Considering the fact that only a few hours had passed together, it was a very strange question, without substance, as their former higher math teacher would say. Looking at her friend carefully, Susan realized that the matter was not clear and asked, "Why did you come here?" "Susan." Helen looked at her with the most honest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Susan, let me go to the sea." Susan looked into that purity and blue and was silent. "Why do you look at me like that?" "I've been taking ducks out for 3 years. Thomas this, Thomas that. I'm sick of it. I want to take a vacation, and Matthew has already bought the tickets, booked the hotel. I'm expecting such romance, mountains, sea, buffet, and you're ruining my mood with your sour face." "Helen, how can you not be ashamed? He's your husband." Susan was kind, but honest and fair. Her friend's cheating while her husband was alive was not just unpleasant, but disgusting. These conversations between friends had been going on for a long time, and Helen had reacted to them just as she did now. "So what? I'm a human being too, and I need positive emotions, otherwise I'll languish. I'm already completely feral. I've turned into an old woman. People go everywhere, go to the sea, have a vacation, but me." Helen almost cried. She felt sorry for herself. "Well, Susan, you won't refuse me, will you?" "I still don't understand how it's possible. Thomas is not stupid. He understands everything. He'll know you've gone off with your lover. I don't care. Maybe then he'll realize what I'm sacrificing." "Helen, you're playing with fire. Have you forgotten who makes your money? Even now that Thomas is in a wheelchair, you're on his payroll. You haven't forgotten that his bright head gives you everything. And you don't work, and you still don't work. Why do you reproach me with a piece of bread?" "Of course I don't work. I'm probably married, taking care of him. He must be an invalid. He needs a nurse." Helen's mood changed 100 times in half an hour. "Oh, Helen." She always knew how to defend herself, and now she squinted her eyes and smiled predatorily. "Are you in love with my invalid husband? You're worried about him, confess." Susan, suddenly blushing, shook her head negatively. "You're such a pest." Helen had no intention of backing down. "Well, if you don't want to, then don't. I'll find out. Obviously there are some services. Can't I find a nurse in a big city for 10 days? And she walked proudly out the door with her snub nose. She made Susan so angry with her snide question that she said angrily, "There's no need to call anywhere. I'll look after Thomas." Helen smiled immediately, as if she had expected nothing else. That's good. Here are your keys. I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. You can figure it out on your own." Wow! It just popped into Susan's head. She took the spare keys with her. She was sure that I would help her deceive her husband. As Susan saw her friend off, Susan almost regretted her sudden decision. Helen was gone as quickly as she had appeared. It was for her impetuosity and determination that Thomas had fallen in love with her 5 years ago, choosing one of her 2 girlfriends. Helen and Susan had always been close, but modest Susan had never been noisy, not particularly witty, and Helen's determination was far from her. The reason they were friends was probably because opposites attract. Helen, with her violent temperament, sometimes had to be restrained. Only Susan could do it. Even Helen's mom would ask her, "Susan, do your best to talk her out of that pimplay Ethan. He'll cheat and dump her, and we'll have to deal with her tantrums." And indeed, it turned out that Ethan, whom Helen was crazy about, had a family and 2 children. Susan was able to prove it to her friend, who was already dreaming of getting married to a handsome man who was having affairs with everyone. Helen, in turn, was also not a dependent Susan kindness. She helped her with housing. When she became friends with a foreign modest girl in her first year, invited her to her place. Susan lived in the dormitory during her sophomore year, but their friendship was so strong that now Helen could stay in her room overnight, especially on those evenings when there were dances nearby. The friends shared their joys and sorrows, but they were not lucky enough to fall in love. They fell in love with the same guy. Thomas studied at a prestigious specialty in their institute, 2 courses older. He was enthusiastic about his future profession, and he was prophesied a brilliant future. The slender, handsome man was a dream of any girl, but he was not attracted to them at all. He was always busy with business. It can be said that Helen herself took the initiative, and he first succumbed to the charm of blue-eyed, cheerful girl, and then fell in love with her. Helen and Thomas were married rather quickly. Helen's family organized a wedding fun, rich, for fellow students. It was a real holiday, including a feast of the belly, which is important for the poor, knowing the granite of science. The party was long and lavish, and who could escort the bride down the aisle? Susan, of course, was a witness at the wedding. The girl tried to smile and pretend that she was having fun, although the cats were scratching at her soul. She tried not to look in the direction of the groom all evening. As soon as she noticed that he was showing interest in Helen, Susan immediately stepped aside. How could anyone get in the way of the maid of honor? Susan, of course, continued to communicate with Helen all the following years. They are friends, but at their home tried not to be at their home. It must be said that she was lucky to have a place to live. In a small hut on the outskirts lived her distant relative, who was either a 3rd or 4th cousin of her grandmother. Susan, out of the kindness of her heart, began to visit the old woman at the request of her relatives. She had never seen Kathy before, but they became friends. Very soon the positive and hardworking girl became the right hand of the old woman, who had long been difficult to leave the house. Kathy was not very ill and died in her sleep. After burying her relative, Susan found out that she had become the owner of her house, and her friends, the newly married couple, had just bought a house nearby. However, it was almost an exchange, as Thomas had an apartment in another neighborhood from his parents. Susan visited them only when she knew for sure that her friend's husband was absent. It was very hard to see Thomas looking at Helen with loving eyes. In 5 years, Susan had never met someone who could displace Thomas from her heart, so she had lived close to the man who occupied her thoughts. But now it was as if he didn't exist for Susan. A stranger's husband, a friend's husband, and just under 3 years ago, a neighbor's family had had an accident. "Thomas, are you sure you're not going to Mary's birthday party?" "No, Helen," I explained. "We're delivering a program to a client. We're past the deadline, and the guys are having some problems, and they're asking for help." I promised. "How can I get a ride?" "You alone have fun without me, Mary. By the way, congratulate me, and also ask me to apologize on my behalf." With these words, Thomas kissed his wife and went out. The day was a weekday and work was not waiting. Helen sighed, stretched in her cozy bed, and fell asleep again. She woke up when the sun was already high. After eating breakfast, she quietly began to brush her feathers. She took a shower and spent a long time primping herself in the mirror. Then she carefully worked on her evening dress. She took one dress out of the closet and another out of the closet. To one of the shoes were uncomfortable. The second will look gloomy in an evening cafe. But this one, soft turquoise, very much suited her. And not too bright, will not overshadow the outfit of the birthday girl, and favorably emphasizes the eyes. "Good, so good," wrote Helen, throwing on a dress with a hanger and dancing in front of the mirror. Since celebrating the wedding with Thomas, Helen lived easily and carefree, having sold the apartment of Thomas's parents, quickly bought a new, bigger, cozier. And most of its cost was paid by themselves, but as themselves, Helen, of course, did not work. Why should she? If her husband earned so well. Helen told her friends and opened her blue eyes wide. "We didn't even notice how we paid off the mortgage. Everything, thank God, is enough. I chose the furniture for the new apartment myself, carefully according to my taste, so that everything fit together." Going to the store gave Helen incomparable pleasure, and she gradually became almost an expert in the world of shopping. Slowly the girl began to deal with herself, visited the pool, spa procedures, and the fact that she had a permanent makeup artist, hairdresser, and manicurist, and nothing to say. No, she did not become pampered and proud boorish, but modest service to her person, began to afford. It pleased her. "Why did you study then?" friends asked. 5 years at a prestigious faculty, and now the diploma is lying somewhere. Why did you have to work so hard?" "Well, hello," Helen marveled. "First of all, the diploma does not interfere with me a bit. Higher education is a prestigious thing after all. You know, people have a different attitude when you tell them the name of your university. What to do all day long if you don't have to work? My friends didn't calm down. No children. Well, children are a living thing." Helen waved them away. "It will always be in time, while we with Thomas do not want to deprive themselves of freedom." "And what do you mean? What to do?" "And the apartment. You have to fix it up, take care of yourself. You know, I feel sorry for my husband. You come with him somewhere to a banquet, for example, or on the anniversary of his leadership, and he has a shaggy wife with rough heels and burrs on the nails. I'll embarrass him. And he's not a laborer, he's the head of the department, by the way. So it should be his look, not yours." Arguing interlocutors. "Yes, of course." Helen laughed. "The king makes the entourage. Have you heard such wisdom, girls? And the husband makes successful who?" "The wife. That's me. I'm the reason Thomas rose." However, soon Helen's friends became quite different. Just like herself, spa and shopping enthusiasts. Those former ones had to earn money. They had no time to listen to the petty troubles of a well-off lady. Helen didn't care about them at all. She spun in a whirlwind of previously unavailable pleasures. No, of course, her parents had provided her with the best of everything before. An only daughter, how could they spoil her? But there was no waiting around, no begging. Thomas entrusted her with all the family bookkeeping and did not interfere in economic affairs, and Helen, with her irrepressible energy, just what she needed. She didn't squander her husband's money, no. There were calculations, but for herself first and foremost. Today, on Mary's birthday, their common old acquaintances gathered, and subconsciously, Helen wanted to surprise everyone, to look the best, to have fun, to prove to who knows who that she lived a wonderful, full life. Preparing for this event took some creative effort on her part. Finally, she was ready, and that's when the phone rang. "Hello. Yes, I paged you. I'm on my way out." And Helen, humming a cheerful song under her nose, ran out of the apartment to the entrance where a cab was waiting for her. Thomas came home from work late at night. Helen was still out. The house seemed empty without her. He dialed his wife's cell phone number. "Honey, how are you? Did you have a good time?" "Oh, Thomas, I'm so glad you're free. It's been a long holiday. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm tired. If you come with me, it will be wonderful." Thomas laughed. There she was, his wife, having fun and tired. How he loved her childlike spontaneity and inconsistency. "All right, I'll be right there," he answered. "Then we'll have tea together." The restaurant was noisy, smoky, and somehow not festive. Entering the room, Thomas involuntarily wrinkled his nose. He had never liked eating establishments, and he considered restaurants, if not a breeding ground for vice, then certainly a haven for idlers. "Handsome, come to us." A well-drunk girl with smeared eyes clung to him. She grabbed him by the elbow and began to pull him towards her laughing friends of the same obscene appearance. Another time. Carefully but firmly withdrawing her arm, Thomas said. He found Helen at the bar, where most of Mary's guests, the staunchest ones, were already seated. The rest of them were too drunk to try to do anything on their own. Only a few more sober couples were stomping around in the middle of the room, dancing to the soft music of a small orchestra, and the orchestra, consisting of an accordionist, a trumpeter, a couple of guitarists, and a drummer, and the dancing couples, and even the bartender of the bar, though torn by customers, seemed to be tired and trying to portray life from the last effort. Helen decided to have a coffee, feeling that she needed to chase away the hops a little, but the decision was risky, and she had been fending off inebriated company for a long time. Her husband showed up just in time. It had to be said. "Thomas," Helen shouted excitedly when she saw him from afar. "There's my husband." This was meant for the drunken blonde, who tried to drag her to the dance, trying to combine clumsily drunken gallantry with brute physical force. "Husband full of peers," yelled one of the blonde's friends. "No, this is not our husband. We do not want such a husband. Come on, honey, I'll show you the sky and diamonds." Mumbled in the meantime, barely standing on his feet, the hapless suitor, and dragged Helen by the arm, not worrying about hurting her. "Come on, boss. Get her out." Cheered on by the jackals surrounding the blonde. "We're going out tonight. Take the girl." "Let her go," softly said Thomas, coming close to the blonde man. He looked at Thomas, unable to realize what they wanted from him, and stubbornly continued to pull the girl by the arm away from the bar. "What are you doing, kid?" A more sober-looking man, a forehead of absolutely criminal appearance, with tattoos on his fingers, moved at Thomas. "You got your paw on the boss." He made an imperceptible movement, and Thomas lost his balance. He struggled to stay on his feet and retaliated, but immediately the other cronies took the fight in a ring. Hands, heads, and bodies flashed in the smoke, and a woman's shrieks and screams were heard. A multi-armed, dense tangle of men's bodies appeared next to the bar. Helen couldn't see, but she knew that Thomas was somewhere down there, under that pile, and she called out to him. "Thomas, Thomas!" The guard blew his whistle, and in an instant the whole gang disappeared from the hall. Only Thomas was still lying on the floor, bleeding underneath. "Thomas, open your eyes, Thomas," shouted Helen, leaning over her husband. Her friends tried to calm her down. "I'll go with you, Helen," said Mary, who in a way considered herself guilty of what had happened. It was her party that had ended so unhappily. When the ambulance arrived, she helped Helen onto the stretcher on which Thomas had been placed. Helen had no idea what was happening, and when the bloodless Thomas was loaded onto the gurney and wheeled into the operating room, she sat almost unconsciously on a table in the white hallway and closed her eyes as if she wanted to hide from reality. The surgery went on for a long time. The surgeon came out to the exhausted Helen. As long as he sleeps, life is out of danger, but the drunken bully's knife had damaged her vertebrae. The doctor hid his eyes. "When can I pick him up?" Helen asked, not realizing the danger of the situation. "Not soon, I'm afraid." The doctor began to wipe the glasses unnecessarily. For a long time he needs absolute peace. And what? Helen impatiently fixed her eyes on the doctor's frowning face. "Your husband won't be able to walk yet." "What do you mean he can't walk?" Helen smiled confusedly. "He won't be able to walk, but what about it? It's good that the blow didn't hit his vital organs, but then you should be thankful that he's alive. Get him on disability. He can probably work from home. He's an engineer, you said. How's the disability?" Helen was just heartbroken. "Maybe someday, but for now, your husband needs your help. Your care and kindness will help him recover, of course, but a full life is out of the question." Helen felt as if she had been replaced, and she went to doctors and institutes, but in vain. Susan, when she heard about the accident, came running to her old friend, and now she was always near her. She empathized with her so much, helped to prepare Helen's apartment, everything for Thomas's discharge, advised her how to arrange the house so that both of them would be more comfortable. She helped in word and deed. It made her heart bleed to think of Thomas. A beautiful and clever young man, now he would be trapped inside the walls of the apartment. And what kind of ordeal would he endure in the hospital room and the operating room? Susan could think of no one else. Her heart still belonged to him alone. She watched Helen's efforts to help her husband regain his health with envy, but also with joy. May he be happy at least in what Helen could do. Thought Susan, and one day said, "Helen, I didn't even realize you had such a heart. What a good girl you are. All that worry means you love Thomas very much. What are you talking about? What the hell kind of heart? Don't you realize I have to live with an invalid, a half-man? I don't want to. Well, I realize I can't leave him, everyone. You'll think I'm bad, and I'll have to waste my life on it." Helen burst into tears. Susan was shocked by her words, and especially her tone. "How can you say that? Thomas has suffered because of you. Who asked him to? If he's not a man and he can't fight, why the hell did he get involved? He's caused me the kind of trouble you wouldn't wish on anyone." Divided Helen was no longer crying, but frantically planning her next trip to the medical luminary who could help her get the invalid, as she called her husband, back on his feet. Susan was simply amazed at how bluntly and cynically her friend explained her troubles. "You are only selfish." She was indignant as she watched her friend blowing the curls that had fallen from her forehead away from her face with an angry expression, and Helen looked particularly pretty. "I'd look at you if you had such a thing. How selfish would you be?" In Helen's beautiful eyes, there were angry tears. She wailed for a long time about her plight, but Susan tried not to listen to her. There were many things about her friend that had often caused Susan rejection and even dislike, but now she couldn't accept what Helen was saying. full of sympathy for Thomas, who was not even aware of the treacherous soul of his wife. Susan even dared to visit him in the hospital a few times, but Thomas was embarrassed. Susan herself did not know how to behave. Knowing Helen's attitude towards her husband, she could not pretend that all was well. It would look silly to cheer her up. Thomas is a sober-minded man, a strong man. He doesn't need these appealing slogans. The embarrassed Susan sat there for 5 minutes, and then she hurried out of the room. And then her friend struck her in the heart. It seemed impossible to betray someone once betrayed, but Helen managed. Helen had dropped by Susan's room a couple of times, cheerful, smelling of perfume, her eyes shining as they had in her early youth. Oh, how Susan remembered that look on her friend's face. Excitement, incredible energy and activity. All these were signs that the girl had fallen in love. And as Susan realized, her old friend was not crazy about her own husband. "Spit it out, Helen," she said sternly when her friend dropped by the other day to borrow a flat iron. "Mine's burnt out, and I'm walking around like an ugly woman," she explained to Susan. "I'm going to keep it until I buy a new one." "You don't care. You don't curl." Well, Helen was the one who cared about her appearance. She pretended not to take Susan's hint. "What do you mean, like get a curl? What are you talking about, girlfriend?" But she was stretching her mouth from the scarlet lipstick in a wide smile. "You're not messing with my head." Susan wouldn't give up. "I can see you at 100 meters. Who you got yourself, you hussy?" "What do you mean, a slut?" Helen also resented me. "You know I would never." "Never her." Susan laughed in her face. "And you cheated just once?" "Yes, I'm in love, Susan." And Helen cried. Susan had to listen to a story that Helen thought would exonerate her. The poor girl, alone, forgotten, neglected by everyone, and only her invalid husband with her, day and night, demanding troubles and cares, incredible efforts on the part of the faithful wife. And here he is, loving, tender, affectionate, intelligent, understanding everything, in short, the epithets that a true man should have. He's like that, you know, Susan. And Helen was silent, covering her eyes, unable to describe adequately all the wonderful qualities of Matthew's character. That was the name of her lover. "I remember you said the same thing about Thomas." Susan didn't soften at all. "I had quickly forgotten what he was like, and he still is, so how could he be worse? He's the same Thomas, aren't you?" "Yeah, of course he is. He's the same, but not the same. I lived behind him like a stone wall. He did everything for me, and now, how can you understand?" And Helen gave her friend an almost contemptuous look. "You've been alone all your life. At least have a lover or something? Otherwise you're sitting there all infallible." Susan looked at her friend in silence, and she couldn't stand her gaze. "What are you looking at? What did I say wrong? Only the plain truth, right?" "Well, Helen, I'll tell you the plain truth too, you bastard. Not only are you selfish, but you're a traitor." Friends quarreled for a long time. Yesterday, after a chance meeting, they seemed to make up, had coffee, but still unexpected was the morning Helen came to Susan. Helen acted as if nothing had happened, but Susan? She was used to all the twists and turns of life, and she was always ready to open the door to anyone who called at it. Susan had not slept much during the night. Her friend's request had stirred her soul. She tossed and turned in her comfortable bed, opened the windows and drank water. When it became clear that she couldn't doze off that easily, she threw a blanket over her shoulders and stepped out onto the balcony into the coolness. The town was sleeping peacefully, only somewhere far away, in the neighborhood of detached small houses, where the new building had not reached, barked something alarmed dogs. "Why are you barking?" Susan asked them. "People are asleep, and you're barking, and you're asleep." She was always talking to something when no one could hear her, to a teacup that slipped out of her hands, to a tree that caught a branch in her hair, to a stray cat that came into her path and looked with a green gaze straight into her eyes, demanding food. Helen's knowledge of this habit of hers would have twisted a finger at her temple. Blessed are you, Susan. But Susan, some of her thoughts and feelings were hidden deep inside. It was enough that the people around her knew that she was not a stupid girl, though she did not have enough stars from the sky. She is not grasping in life, but she knows how to climb all the way and tear off a piece of herself, that she is strict, if not to say harsh. She doesn't tolerate men around her. Maybe she's been through enough. No one knew. Since childhood, only Helen knew her, but that one did not bother to think about the character of her friend and could not tell anyone anything special about her. Even if it was necessary that she was blessed, she would confirm it. Such a modest woman that it's sickening, but Helen was always scolding her for it. If only her friend knew what it was like for Susan not to show her feelings for Thomas. How she could use that proverbial modesty to cover her love, her refusal to communicate with him. She even stopped going to discos with Helen, realizing that she would be with Thomas. And how can you take away the excitement when you see his fluffy, like a girl's eyelashes over his brown eyes? How do you hold back the disappointed exhale when he's hugging someone else in front of you? So what if it's your best friend? The more it hurts. It must be said that at first Susan, with all her body and soul, rushed towards the young man. She flew to wherever he was. She talked about him. She was burning with love. It seemed that he was also drawn to Susan, but one evening, sitting with Helen on a bench near the entrance, Susan suddenly heard, "Susan, I'm in love." Her friend even seemed a little embarrassed. "That's not like Helen." "Again?" Susan laughed. "This is the 5th time this year." "You're laughing, and I haven't slept for 2 nights." Helen roared. "I've never had anything like this in my life, you know that." She continued to sob. She wondered who is this scoundrel who tortures her favorite girl. "Don't cry, silly." She stroked Helen's back. "You should be happy. It's great to fall in love for real, and even in spring." "You think so?" Helen exhaled into her friend's chest and looked at her with blue eyes full of tears. She was just like the doll from the picture, but her feelings were really strong. "Do you think Thomas will love me too?" "He doesn't pay any attention to me. He's dancing with you or whispering with Clara from the 5th group, and I'm suffering." Helen continued to describe her suffering, but Susan could no longer hear her. After Thomas's name was called, it was as if she had been hit on the head with something terribly heavy and dull. And from that moment, she sank into utter despair, and that was it. She stopped flying. Her heart was smoldering in her breast, burning slowly from a great feeling that was carefully concealed, and it was impossible to let this fire burn, lest it should burn the 3 of them at once. Toward morning, Susan fell into a heavy sleep and awoke unaccustomedly late, at 11:30. The sun was beating through the bedroom window and had already warmed the linoleum on the floor beside the bed. My head ached, and with a heavy heart I began to pack, and everything was going wrong. She lost her hairbrush, the hair dryer wouldn't turn on, the coffee came out of the turbo and flooded the stove. She wondered how she would explain Helen's departure to Thomas. Would they be able to tell a decent lie? The whole story disgusted her, and Susan felt like she was about to jump into the unknown. The cliff did not seem quiet and peaceful. Finally, the shower was over. Her head was in order. The rest of the spilled coffee was drunk. There was nowhere to go. It was time to go, no matter how much she procrastinated. Susan grabbed her purse and left the apartment. The morning had not yet fully turned into day. The weather was fine. While she got to the house of her friends, where she decided to walk, the girl calmed down a little and tuned it to the right wave. Be that as it may. After all, there was no fault of hers, and to decide for others their fate, it is not given to her. By the time she got there, it was about 12. She found the keys in her purse quickly, opened the door, hesitantly entered. Still, even though she'd been setting herself up all night and all morning, Susan was having a hard time. Now she would see Thomas. It had been many months since her unfortunate visit to the hospital, and the woman was worried. With a pounding heart, she walked to the deserted kitchen, took a carton of milk out of her bag, and put it in the refrigerator. Only after washing her hands, running a damp hand across her forehead, did she finally decide to walk to the room where Thomas was supposed to be. She was also helping Helen get her ready. Knocking lightly, she opened the door ajar. "May I?" Thomas, dressed in a white t-shirt and sports pants, was sitting in a chair by the computer desk. The man didn't immediately realize that it wasn't his wife walking around the apartment and was very surprised when he heard a knock on the door and then saw Susan enter. "Susan? What are you doing here? How did you get in?" Susan silently showed his keys. "I don't understand. Where's Helen? Did something happen? She had to leave on business." Thomas's face twisted, and he gritted his teeth. She'd gone to the sea with Matthew, after all. Susan saw Thomas's hand on the table, clenched into a fist, and the jowls on his face flared. She could see that he was sharply upset and trying to contain his anger. But what struck her most was that he wasn't surprised that he'd known before. "Where did you?" The question froze on her lips. "How do I know?" Thomas grinned unkindly. "Well, lately, Helen hasn't been very shy with me. She treated me like a piece of furniture. Could talk quietly on the phone at 2 o'clock as if I were handicapped and on my ears. Susan didn't know how to soothe or comfort him, said the first thing that came to mind. Thomas, Helen is just tired." And then she realized how stupid that sounded, and Thomas grinned evilly. "Tired? Tired of what? I do the cooking. I do the laundry too. I even learned how to use the vacuum cleaner. But I can't go to the store, and I can't take out the garbage, and you've come to cover for your girlfriend? Well, I can tell you that you shouldn't. I'm doing just fine on my own." He turned his baby carriage around and headed for the other room, and Susan was struck by his every word. She had thought she would find an invalid lying there, a helpless sick man who needed care every minute of the day. Yes, of course, Thomas, the Thomas she knew and loved, was going to be like that, independent and strong and angry. The astonished Susan fully accepted his anger and resentment toward his wife. She probably should have left, but for some reason she was angry too and followed him. Thomas was looking out the large window facing the street. You could see by the look on his face that he was a little overcome with emotion. "I understand you, Thomas," Susan said softly, "but I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know, I promise you." Thomas did not look her in the face. He felt ashamed that he had attacked Susan. She had never given any reason to suspect her of the slightest deceit or intrigue. She was, in Thomas's mind, one of the finest girls he'd ever met. "I'm sorry." Muffled, he said, "I must have misspoken. I didn't mean to offend you, did I?" "Well then, why don't we at least have some tea? I've been walking so long, it's already hot outside. Come on." The man changed his tone abruptly. "You do the kitchen, and I'll finish my work quickly. I've got a little bit to do, and then I'm free." While Susan made tea and sliced a cake, for which she had specially visited her favorite pastry shop, Thomas was able to finish the work scheduled for today. Rubbing his hands together in anticipation of the tea party, he rolled into the kitchen and washed his hands under the faucet for a long time. "I'm a sick man. I can wash here too. I just need to write places for children and the handicapped." His black humor did not seem so black because surprisingly the man's mood rose, and at the table he was having fun as if he had forgotten about his wife and her treacherous departure. "So you work from home?" Susan asked, though she had heard about it from her conversations with Helen. "Susan, you know that work is more important to me than anything else." Thomas answered and looked her in the eyes for the first time. Susan knew. She saw that familiar look and remembered how from their first meeting she had remembered those brown eyes, the deep, penetrating gaze of Thomas, with which he seemed to encompass not the outer, but the inner essence of a person. How then did it happen that their life together with Helen turned out so unsuccessfully? Or was it all to blame, the fateful incident in that very restaurant be damned? She involuntarily averted her eyes so as not to betray her feelings and asked, "And how do you get the assignment, and how do you manage to work with the group? After all, your guys probably continue to work as before. There are no problems." Thomas answered with a noticeably more cheerful tone. "We used to talk on the internet a lot if we had to make a decision. The machine, as he called the computer, stayed on 24 o'clock. That's what you do. I remember one night I dreamed of an important move, jumped up to the computer, and even Skype had to be used to wake Jack up. The two of us were working it out, his wife yelling at me for not letting us sleep, Helen yelling at me. Then Thomas goes quiet, and Helen comes to mind. Susan had to invent a simpler topic to distract him from his sad thoughts. Do you ever go outside? You're like Schumacher in your wheelchair, aren't you? No, I'm mostly on the balcony. Thomas shrugged it off. Why not? The weather's so nice out. A street is a street, and there are neighbors, and all sorts of animals and birds. Susan was puzzled. There's a staircase on the first floor that I can't climb by myself. I don't want to ask anyone. What about Helen? She's at home. Well, Helen, she's always busy. She says you can get some air on the balcony. It's nothing. I'm often on the balcony, especially in the evening. Susan, to be honest, didn't understand. Helen had always told her that she was almost carrying pots for her husband, but it turned out to be the other way around. She knew her friend's habit of justifying herself, no matter what the circumstances, but to make up such a brazen composition, to elevate herself to the rank of Sister of Mercy, it's too much. While Susan was digesting the information she had received, Thomas had quite deftly dragged the dishes to the sink and had already begun to name them. Susan took a dish towel and began to wipe the cups, standing next to him. How about after tea we go for some air? A walk in the park? He looked at her in surprise and happily agreed. They were having fun. Thomas was joking with himself. I'm the beneficiary today. I have to look good. He pulled one t-shirt after another out of the closet, then looked at Susan and discarded it. No, that won't do. We have to have the same color scheme. Why is that? Susan wondered, amused by the man's grip on the pile of clothes. Why not? Let everyone see that we are together. There must be an ensemble in everything, even in clothes. The blood rushed to Susan's cheeks. Silly, innocent jokes, but she was still relieved and pleased that he had at least united in this way. Opening all the windows wide open to air out the apartment in their absence, they moved into the hallway. The elevator, then the proverbial stairs, which, with Susan's help, they overcame almost imperceptibly. And now they were in the park. Fresh wind, bright greenery, birds chirping. Thomas had a look of bliss on his face. He easily rolled his stroller along the sidewalk, and Susan walked beside him and did not even notice that he was not walking beside her, but sitting. She had no thoughts that he was an inferior, defective man. What kind of a handicapped man is he? He is the smartest, the most beautiful, and the best. Susan settles down on the bench. Thomas stops his stroller across the street so he can see her face. "Oh my God, Susan," he said, covering his eyes. "You just made me so happy. Do you realize that?" He looked at her again with that penetrating gaze of his. "It's the first time I've been this happy in years. Do you know what it's like to walk outside? I don't care if it's in a stroller. It's happiness to sit in the sun, and if it was raining, I'd be happy in the rain, and if it was windy, you'd be wet in the rain and cold in the wind." Susan laughed, not letting him finish. Now she didn't remember how worried she had been before she came. All thoughts of what and how she would explain it had crashed into Thomas's simplicity. She was at ease with him, as if there were no years that had passed, her anguish about him being someone else's husband, and she had finally made up her mind. "Thomas, I probably shouldn't ask that question. Helen is my friend, but I don't understand what's holding you back. You're so independent, aren't you?" "Yeah, I feel sorry for her. She's not used to work. She's not used to life. But she's adapted." He grinned again, bitterness showing through his smile. "Now I don't even know what to do." "But you love her, don't you?" I used to." Thomas grunted, embarrassed, and turned the conversation to something else. There was an inner tact that her friend Helen lacked, thought Susan, looking at Thomas's smiling lips and changing face. She laughed at his jokes, said something to him, while she herself didn't quite understand even the topic of the conversation. She was simply enjoying these precious hours of conversation with the one who from the first day of their acquaintance had been the only one to occupy her thoughts and feelings, but the evening chill was beginning to be felt. "What's up, Goose?" Susan addressed Thomas affectionately. "For a first walk, I think that's quite enough, don't you?" "I would have stayed here, Susan," he confessed, "but I'm afraid you're too strict. You'll punish me for breaking the regime." "How would I punish you?" Susan laughed. "Not serving dinner? So you're the one with the mustache." Again with jokes and laughter, we started on the way back. A light dinner seemed enough for both of them. Thomas was tired from the fresh air. Susan, who had been sleep-deprived and worried all this time, had not taken care of anything substantial. Helen had eggs and butter in the refrigerator, thank God, so we ate what normal people usually eat for breakfast, omelettes. Now that we've eaten, we can go to sleep. Susan laughed, mimicking Mama Toad from the cartoon. The dishes were put away again, and then Susan, despite Thomas's objections, quickly hung up his scattered clothes in the closet and said goodbye. "Well, I'm off. What can I buy for tomorrow?" "Yes, I'm not fussy. 1 potato or pasta is enough for me," answered the embarrassed Thomas. He was uncomfortable, a grown man, but he was sitting and waiting for a stranger, a beautiful woman even more so, to bring him groceries. "All right, then it's up to me, okay?" Susan smiled. "I'll come over right after work. Okay, good night." "Good night, Susan," Thomas replied affectionately. "Thank you, you know." He looked away embarrassed. As Susan walked home, she had so many thoughts on her mind. Why hadn't Helen left at least the basic necessities? Why hadn't she even thought to give money or warn her that there was nothing in the house to cook with? Why? But she shoved all these economic endeavors away from her and began to sing quietly to herself a long-standing song. Couldn't she just be happy that she was alive and well? That she spent almost the whole day with the man she loved? Even if he was a stranger's husband, Susan had not trespassed on him in any way, but they had had that day, well, even if it was only half a day, but what joyful hours it had been. She looked at Thomas, admired him, listened to his voice. Susan walked on and could not feel her feet, immersed in the depths of her own happiness. She was sure she would not sleep again for a long time tonight. But as soon as she was in her bed, she fell into a happy, serene sleep. It was not surprising that Thomas had not slept that night. He had a lot to think about. Why did his and Helen's life have to be like this? After a day spent outdoors with Susan, the man felt like the past was just a dream. He seemed to have a second wind today. Everything was refracted now through these half-days. Peaceful, full sun and sky, hours, time that was adorned with good, not burdensome conversation, bird chirping. In fact, today he was finally breathing fully for the first time since that fight in the restaurant. For the first time, he was truly enjoying life. Why aren't you happy? Helen used to pick on him. But why? Why aren't you rejoicing loudly? I am rejoicing loudly. It's just you listening quietly. Thomas laughed and admired his beloved, beautiful wife. She opened her blue eyes wide and began to tease him again. You, Thomas, are just a babaca. And she would laugh. Everything seemed funny to her then. Jokes, fun, the constant companions of youth, and they both had the same habits. They liked the same songs, movies, were friends with classmates. Common friends, just as noisy and mischievous, often gathered at their homes, singing songs to the guitar, dancing. There were times when one of the guys, Thomas's associates, in the midst of the fun took out a pen and a notebook from his pocket and sketched some entertaining scheme. He would show one, and the others would immediately follow. Often the evening continued in the hall, where under the screaming record, shouting the singer, the guys furiously discussed the details of the drawing. And the girls, later brides and wives, with an understanding look at their cavaliers, sighed and went to the kitchen and continued their hen party there. For Thomas and his friends, work was the meaning of life, a hobby, a mission. Helen got used to this character of her husband, especially since this work brought excellent material results. The young engineers had time to work and have fun. Helen did not feel neglected by her husband's attention. On the contrary, when the guests left, the young couple threw themselves into each other's arms as if they had just met after a long separation. Thomas, are you really happy with me? Naively asked Helen, who could not be fed with anything but a verbal declaration of love. Don't you know? Thomas teased her, who, of course, did not believe the cunning wife, who pretended to be a girl and flapped her eyelashes. Oh, the husband is here, marveled Helen in the evening. And I did not look at the time, and dinner is not yet. Well, nothing. Now we'll think of something. The husband rubbed his palms and started cooking. Helen did her best to pretend that she was ready to help him, but most of the time she ended up sitting across from him and began to act out a funny scene in the store or at the bus stop. Thomas laughed, and meanwhile from under his hands came out another miracle of culinary art. Everyone knows that men are the best cooks. Condescension and forgiveness. Now Thomas saw himself from the outside. He forgave his wife not only cute flaws. Over time he learned to condescend to her small, if not to say petty concerns about the cozy nest. Helen, don't you care what I sleep on, what I eat on, and what I cover myself with? He was puzzled when his wife dragged him to the store for new bedding. Yes, of course not. Again, Helen's eyes widened in horror. Let it be beautiful, Thomas. We've got money, so why not buy nice things? The hostess, who could hardly cook and had no intention of learning, knew what glasses were needed, for what drinks, how to arrange the forks in the order of serving. What dishes, what order? Thomas marveled. What are you talking about, wife? He didn't care much about such trifles, although after work he wanted to eat sometimes terribly. The cookery shop on the first floor of their house was a great help. And then the trouble happened. Thomas knew right away that Helen couldn't take it. Yes, she showed miracles of heroism, recognized, worried, searched for doctors, but Thomas knew everything. Helen wasn't his. It was the elusive movement of her lips, the glance cast at him, the tone she used to speak to him. Not a single person would have suspected Helen of a change in her attitude toward her husband. On the contrary, everyone around admired his wife. His attending doctor used to say, "Well, your wife would bring a dead man back to his feet. I envy you." Thomas, who by Helen's breathing could judge her mood, closed himself up too. Suddenly, the warm ray that connected the couple and made his wife his own and the only one. The husband felt in an instant that Helen had already cut him out of her life, and so it turned out. With the move home from the hospital, Thomas became convinced that he had been right. Apparently, it is true that when a sick person is not under a lot of care, he tries to get back on his feet on his own. At home, Helen relaxed, no longer preoccupied with her husband's health. She no longer believed that he could be helped. She tried to use all the resources of free medicine. While her husband was in the hospital, nannies helped him, washed him, served him, moved him on a gurney, rolled him to the right building for examination. Helen only organized and managed the process, and the rest of the deadlines set by the doctors were in an indefinite distance. Maybe later? These words of doctors were supposed to inspire faith in the future, but in fact served only as a consolation to the patient and his relatives. To take him out for paid procedures, to take him somewhere in a wheelchair? No. Helen's not ready for that. How can she cope with such a load? And financially, it was not very good. The supplies they did have, thanks to Thomas's occasional foresight, were quickly melting away. Helen's parents had long since retired, and it was impossible to turn to them for help. Some money was raised by the guys at Thomas's office. What next? Thomas realized that something had to be done urgently. He saw the longing in his wife's eyes, watched how she looked in the mirror, and looked at her wrinkles. Once he waited for her to leave for the store, he called a friend. "Hey, Jack, listen, why don't you give me a job? I'll do what I can for now, and then we'll see. You can't just lie there. Your head'll go flat. Oh, glad to see you, old man. You're just in time. We need some help around here." Maybe they don't need any help, Thomas reasoned, but if one of his friends approached him, would he refuse? They would decide how to pay him, but he couldn't do without work. There is already on the table is not particularly substantial food lately. When he was engrossed in his work, he immediately forgot about his health problems. Even a couple of times he involuntarily wanted to get up and walk, but immediately remembered his immobility and got angry at the whole world. But unlike Helen, he couldn't show it to anyone. Helen was pitied by everyone. How she takes care of a sick husband, puts her life on the altar of his health. Helen supported this legend in every possible way, giving in and discussing with them diagnoses and treatments. In short, the entire recovery of her spouse, a loyal and strong fighting friend of Thomas. She was able to present herself in such a way that she did not whine, did not complain. However, everyone understood Helen as a heroine and sympathy is absolutely necessary for her. She needed a vacation. Is that conceivable? A young beauty, and she sits alone all day. The mother of one of Helen's friends lamented, "No sleep, no rest, poor girl." It is necessary to rest, my dear. For some reason, no one considered Thomas a society, an invalid, what to talk to him about, and anyway, how to live with only one person for months without going out into the world. Helen, they were beckoning her to visit, inviting her to dinner parties as well. She observed decorum, arriving late and leaving early to court her husband. At one of these evenings she was seated with a tall, gray-eyed, handsome man who kindly courted her, poured wine. He did not dare to ask her to dance, but when he noticed that she was going to leave the society, he asked her to dance. "Would you allow me to escort you?" "Well, if you want, for God's sake," agreed Helen, evaluating, looking at his suit, obviously tailored to order. Broad shoulders. Handing the cape to the closet, the man introduced himself. "I'm Matthew." It was awkward. The table was so noisy. "I have a little business in." He named a town not far away. "I'm here a lot on business with friends. My name is Helen." The girl held out her hand and looked Matthew straight in the eye. I know quite a lot about you," Matthew said, bringing Helen's hand to his lips, and remembering all these events, the man sighed and turned from side to side. The morning is wiser in the evening. He finally decided and allowed himself to remember today. A park, flower beds with flowers, and on a bench under an acacia tree, sitting a beautiful girl. "Susan," Thomas said and smiled. The next day, Susan arrived at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. How she managed to get home from work so quickly and to go to the store and cook delicious cutlets at home, Thomas could not understand. Apparently, she was fast and skillful. Having filled the bathtub, without a word, Thomas rolled the chair to her. "Don't argue, please. I helped you yesterday, too. You didn't even wash your feet after the walk, for sure. No excuses today." Susan's stern voice sounded more to herself than to Thomas. It was true, they hadn't had time to do that yesterday, and both of them were embarrassed. So today, the girl had to act like freaking Bach from the cartoon. She helped Thomas to undress down to his underwear and get into the bathtub. Thomas, strangely enough, wasn't too shy. What could he do if he was in such trouble? He would have helped his friend just as much. Susan rubbed his back, her trembling hands occasionally touching the smooth skin, checked again that everything was all right, and walked away hiding an embarrassed look. While Thomas washed, she boiled potatoes, mashed them with butter, milk, and garlic cloves, according to her grandmother's recipe. When the steamed and satisfied Thomas was put in the stroller and brought to the kitchen, everything on the table was sparkling. "Am I in heaven?" Thomas exclaimed and began to eat with pleasure. The evening had brought them closer together. Susan lightly ran her hand over Thomas' head as she said goodbye. "Well, see you tomorrow." He caught her hand, shook it, and said, "Susan, you are certainly a bright hope. You know that, don't you?" "What would I do without you?" 2 weeks passed like a day. Susan realized that in 2 days Helen would be back, and then that would be it. When she arrived at Thomas's house in the evening and opened the door, she was pleasantly surprised. The man was cooking something in the kitchen, and the smell was amazing. Susan entered the kitchen with a smile, looked surprised at the table set, wine, handles. Here, decided to say goodbye. "Wow," said the touched Susan quietly. "Let's have dinner. You must try my baked chicken." They both tried to put everything they were thinking about aside and just enjoyed the evening. Thomas was telling some funny stories and Susan was laughing. At one point she saw Thomas freeze and look at her. Both of them fell silent. That long look revealed to each everything the other was thinking. Susan was looking at him and Thomas was looking at her. "Susan, don't look at me like that. You're tearing my heart out. We just can't have anything because I'm an invalid. I would never put that kind of burden on you. You're not a burden. Susan quietly knelt down beside him and kissed him. In the morning, Susan woke up to someone looking at her, opened her eyes, and smiled. Thomas. He buried his face in her hair. Jesus, Susan, what are you doing to me? They made breakfast together, and then Thomas walked her to the door. Susan, leave the keys. The girl nodded, put the keys on the nightstand, and said goodbye. Thomas, I just want you to know. I've loved you always. I love you now. He covered his ears with his hands. Don't say anything else. I realized a lot last night. Susan, I'm an invalid. We're not going to change anything. Understand, sooner or later, it will be the same as with Helen. You'll get tired and I won't survive it. Thomas, no, you're wrong. You're wrong, that's all. When you love someone, you can't get tired of them. I don't want you to live with an invalid. I want you to be fine. Thomas, he closed the door. Susan stood for a minute and rushed down the stairs, and Helen was going to enjoy the magnificent beaches of Thailand for the next 2 weeks. The clearest water, the almost deserted beach, the magnificent views. They were lucky enough to be in a place that had yet to be developed by tourists. It was great. No men with drunken shouting, no fat women with powerful torsos coming out of their swimsuits, and no one drags food in plastic bags and sacks from the table to their room. Everyone eats right here in the hotel restaurant. Is it any wonder? Such beautiful nothing to do. How long had she dreamed of it? And how long had it taken her to get to this point? But that wasn't even the point. And the sea, and the beaches, and the delicious food were only so good because Helen was here with her friend Matthew. Matthew, isn't it great? For the 100th time she asked Matthew, stroking his powerful arms stretched out on the sand. He lazily lifted himself up, hugged Helen, and hummed contentedly. I feel good with you everywhere, my bunny, and reached for her neck with his lips, despite the fact that it was terribly hot, and any touch on another's heated body was close to death by number. Helen would laughingly move away, Matthew would pretend to reach for her even more, and this game would keep them occupied for quite some time. Then they'd run for a swim, and when the sun was already high, they'd go to the hotel. What are we going to do today? Helen asked a riddle and answered it herself. We are going to lie down like seals and watch some stupid movie under the air conditioner. For some reason on vacation, it's always the stupid movies you want to watch. Matthew laughed. For Helen, vacation was a stretch, of course, but she didn't realize it. It seemed to her that until now she had been in a terrible captivity, for a long time the slave of some villain who had subjugated her to his cruel will. She had told Matthew so of her existence before their acquaintance. And then, at last, my knight on a white horse appeared and broke the fetters by which I was bound. Such pathos and childish thoughts flashed somewhere in the back of her mind, again bringing the girl back to the distant times of childhood and early romantic youth. Well, yes, my car is exactly white in color, picked up her chattering lover. What to do? I like light colors. You know, white is the embodiment of purity and freshness. It's a combination of all the colors of the spectrum. Showing her knowledge of physics, Helen continued, I studied once, so I still have at least such scattered information in my head. Oh, you're so smart. Matthew threw himself at her, and the movie was completely forgotten. The young people enjoyed each other, and they did not get bored with this activity neither day nor night. Tired from such a stormy vacation, they fell asleep. Then Helen, who had come to her senses, pushed Matthew out of bed. Matthew, get up quickly. We're going to be late for dinner. Their young bodies demanded support and food to restore their strength, and the lovers rushed downstairs to the restaurant, barely having time to put themselves in some sort of order. However, Moors in the hotel were the most free, and it was not customary among rich people to pay attention to who was dressed how. So it was all the same. Even in a loincloth, you could have dinner. A week later, there was a lot more people on the beach. Oh my God, Matthew. Our piece is over. Helen stretched her lips unhappily. Moreover, the female children's voices made it clear that they were from about the same place Helen and Matthew had come from. Oh, come on, Matthew said indifferently. Don't you have enough room? Isn't it cramped? Let them rest. We're not the only ones. He should have listened to Helen's words. He would have done even better if he had taken a closer look at the newly arrived compatriots, but the proverb says that if you knew where to fall, you would have made a bed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble on that usual sunny day vacationers. Having risen early, they tried to have time to sunbathe and swim in the sea. Then swimming was possible only in the pool. The sun was too hot. Helen and Matthew had time to ride a bike and go to a remote area where there was a special temple. Tired from the trip, they slept in the room for a while and in anticipation of dinner, went down to the restaurant. They had their favorite seat and a view from the large window of the sea with their backs to the door. Taking their usual seat, the couple waited for the waiter to bring their order. One of the best evenings of the lovers' lives was passing serenely. Matthew was about to start his coffee when suddenly someone clapped him on the shoulder. Irritation appeared on the man's face instantly, and he turned around to face the impolite passerby. But he had to hold back the scream that was about to burst from his lips. Standing beside him was his business partner, Parker, and this man in the business world occupied a position quite high behind Matthew himself. Charles. Matthew opened his arms cordially. What brings you here? The birthday of the heart, as they say. Hello, Matthew. Charles' voice was rough, as a master of life should be. Is this where you've been hiding from us? I'm calling him. I'm going to offer him a deal, and he's hiding here with his beauty. This is, as I understand, your Melissa, isn't it? And he reached out to Helen with a smile, preparing to shake her hand. Helen. Matthew spoke quickly, and Helen held out her hand to Charles, putting the sweetest smile on her face. I thought you told me you were married to Melissa, didn't you? And you joked that Melissa was the only one who could save me. Charles was surprised and didn't say anything. So what's the deal, Charles? Taking him under his elbow, Matthew tried to steer the conversation away from him. But the moment was lost, and the place for a business conversation looked completely inappropriate. The men stood in the aisle, obstructing the movement of waiters in white uniform tunics, in full view of the entire room. Helen stood completely dumbfounded. The men, of course, could neither move away nor sit down at the table until the situation was clarified, and she decided to be the first to clarify it. Quickly crashing between the interlocutors, she addressed Charles first. Did you say married to Melissa? Her eyes bore into the man's. He was confused. Well, yes, at Christmas. Didn't everyone say hello at the banquet? Turning sharply to Matthew, Helen almost knocked his head on his chin. Are you married? Matthew remained stupidly silent. Charles, too, moved slightly aside in confusion, not knowing how to get out of the unpleasant situation, while Helen's shrieking could be heard throughout the restaurant. You tricked me. You said you were going to go to the mountains at Christmas, and you were organizing a wedding at the same time. Shut up, quiet. But menacingly Matthew told her, with anger looking into her blue eyes. There are people here. The girl was out of breath. Oh, there are people here. She shouted hysterically, and I'm not a human being. You're a scoundrel. You're a cheat. She slapped the man on the cheek. The restaurant patrons watched them in amazement. Matthew grabbed Helen by the arms and tried to stop her, but she stubbornly pulled out of his arms, trying to scratch his face, pull out his hair, or injure him in any way. A matron in a black tuxedo was already approaching them, summoned by a waiter. Matthew let go of Helen, turned abruptly, and left without paying for dinner. Helen was led out under the arms from behind her and taken to an office where they gave her water and tried to calm her down. "Madam," the matron said to her politely, "I sympathize with your troubles, but your companion has not paid for the dinner, and this is too much money for us to let you go without payment. Would you be so kind as to make a settlement?" He bowed respectfully to Helen. Fortunately, she still had enough money on her card to pay the restaurant bill, and she managed to avoid an embarrassing eviction from the hotel and a scandal. When she finally returned to her room, she saw that Matthew's things were gone, and the corridor clerk informed her that the gentleman in the room had left the hotel with his luggage. It turned out that Matthew had gone home to his family that evening. Helen, who had spent all her savings on her card at the restaurant, was still lucky that the hotel room had been paid for in advance when Matthew had booked it, and the return ticket in electronic form was already in her phone. Helen was both anguished and excited at the same time to be able to go home. But stronger than all the mixed feelings, rage and hatred for her lover raged in her. After thinking for a while, she decided to live out the paid term in the hotel. She did not want to change her ticket without knowing the language, but more than this difficulty, she was frightened by the thought that the exchange would require additional expenses. There was only a little money left. She pondered. The breakfasts at the hotel were paid for. She could use her pennies to buy the cheapest food during the day. How much did she really need? Eat better in the morning, go to breakfast later. There's no way she'll be traveling to resorts and beaches anytime soon. At least she could have some fun at the expense of that asshole Matthew. Helen didn't care about the moral side of her affair. The scandal at the restaurant didn't stop her from enjoying a full breakfast alone either. Men, regulars of the restaurant, could not but remember the bright lady who slapped her companion in public, and there were no men willing to approach Helen. And what kind of acquaintance is there in the morning, whether sober or hungover? Of course, all this did not add to Helen's mood. She spent the rest of the time alone, driving away from herself the thoughts of returning home soon. But subconsciously she tuned herself to her old life to meet her husband. She hadn't called him once while she'd been with Matthew, and now calls had become an expense. Nothing. The young woman consoled herself. Thomas hadn't gone anywhere. He hadn't started walking without me. I'll live peacefully and quietly, and I don't care about people like Matthew, the bastard. And the indignation, so diligently suppressed by her, flared up again inside. The image of the lover she now hated came back to her in a completely different form. She remembered his manner of deafening laughter, his grimaces when he tried to be nice to her. Greedy bastard. Helen sputtered to herself. Could not take a 5-star hotel, then I could at least to the end of the human rest. Of course, after a couple of days, the anger dulled in Helen, lying under an umbrella on the beach, already lazily, only by inertia, went over in her head the options for revenge against the traitor Matthew. Why is he a traitor? Helen could not explain, as she saw the situation only from her side. When her stay at the hotel had ended, she had thoughtlessly packed her suitcases, which now had to be carried by herself. She didn't want to pay anyone, for fear of unforeseen expenses. Automatically packing, she indifferently looked around the room, the bed on which she had spent the first week so happily and the last few days so longingly. She had relaxed a little on the plane. The journey was already tiring, and coupled with the sad thoughts had upset Helen. She arrived home with no mood. She left her suitcases in the hallway and went into the kitchen, where Thomas was sitting at the table, singing tea and cake. Did the pie look homemade? The girl noted with a keen eye as she walked, and Thomas said, "Hello, hello." Thomas replied, looking intently at his wife, "How was your vacation?" "Fine." Faintly, Helen answered, not paying attention to her husband's tone. Having washed her hands, she was going to have tea too. She liked home-cooked food much better than restaurant meals, and airplane lunches were terrible. She couldn't lie. It's tasteless, like chewing on paper or rags. At home, at first glance, everything was fine. Looking around the kitchen, Helen noticed everything: a sparkling clean gas stove, obviously recently washed curtains on the window, a small bunch of flowers blazing on the windowsill. No sign of dirty dishes or cooking. Thomas left almost everything in order after cooking too, but now there was a woman's hand in everything. Helen was already sure that Susan would not let her down, a proven person. "You don't look like you're back from vacation. Why are you in no mood?" Thomas asked again. Helen was silent, cutting off a large piece of potato and meat pie. Without looking at her husband, she poured herself some tea from the heated kettle and sat down across from him. "Oh yes, I forgot to ask, how was Matthew?" "Didn't disappoint." Helen hesitated, bringing a piece of cake to her mouth, but then grinned, not wanting to show her confusion. Had Susan snitched? What a fool, in love with you like a cat, even that you are. Helen nodded at the stroller. "Doesn't stop her." "Don't you dare talk about her like that." Thomas was angry. Helen squinted her beautiful blue eyes. "Honey, did you two have an affair while I was away?" "Why? A knave fool and an invalid. What's not a couple?" At her own words, Helen laughed, forgetting the cake and tea. So funny, she thought, was the picture before her eyes. Susan looking at her husband and Thomas, pathetic in his wheelchair. What a bunch of weirdos, finding each other too. Thomas gritted his teeth. "Well, that's that, my dear. You can pack your things and go away. I knew about your affair a long time ago, and Susan had nothing to do with it. You've lost your conscience. In front of me, you've made dates and made love to your Matthew. I was hoping that at least you'd be sensible enough to come to your senses. To be so mean and come home without a shred of conscience? Are you sick, Thomas, or did you hit your head? Do you really think Susan's gonna take care of you now? Nobody wants you. You realize what you are, don't you? You're an invalid, a freak, an unfit freak. Do you even realize that?" Helen, heated by her husband's words, didn't remember that she had an unfinished piece of pie in her hand and crumbs stuck in the corners of her lips. With a wave of her hands, she knocked over the hot tea and shrieked, shaking off her dress. Further insults came as if from the horn of plenty. Thomas did not tolerate it and shouted, "Get ready." Helen grabbed the phone. "Hello, Susan. Don't you have anyone else to talk to?" "What are you doing with the inferior?" "I'm laughing my ass off right now. A handicapped man has found a mistress. Now you listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. Don't even try." "What? You're going to move out of your grandmother's house and into an apartment? Don't dream of it." Throwing the phone away, she turned to Thomas with flared nostrils. "Don't even think about living in this apartment." She turned to Thomas. "In fact, I'll sue you for maintenance. You're obliged to maintain me." Thomas, as if seeing his wife for the first time, she looked like a witch from a horror movie, beautiful and scary at the same time. Blue flames blazed in her eyes. Her scarlet lips changed their shape, from a sinister smile to a contemptuous curve. Her hair spilled over her shoulders, and the woman was evil incarnate. Thomas even laughed. How'd that make you feel? You even looked prettier when you started calling me names. Calm down. Forget about your dreams. I'm disabled, and I got my apartment from my parents. So, Helen, you're gonna have to go to Matthew. The mention of her sneaky lover threw Helen off balance. She ripped her coat off the rack in a frenzy and ran out the door, cursing Thomas, Susan, and everything in the world. Susan hung up the phone and cried. Helen had just climbed, in big muddy boots, into her soul, and in 2 minutes had trampled everything possible there, professionally trampled. God, why is everything so complicated? Why does she, Susan, get everything through the cracks, and not just straight and simple like the others? But if you think about it, Helen's right. Susan, her friend, just took advantage of Helen's absence. She's a regular bitch. And once again, Susan's days became gray and dull. Again, there was no reason to be happy, healed like before, only it was even harder. Now she didn't know how the man she loved smelled, what strong hands he had, how he knew how to lift her spirits and calm her down. It was all the more difficult to realize that now she would never be able to forget Thomas, and at the same time she would never be together with him. She would try to avoid even a chance meeting with him, but she had lost her friend too, and forever too. Susan got up in the morning, habitually drank her coffee with a sandwich, habitually went to work, talked, did everything that was supposed to be done there, even conscientiously and honestly. She could even smile. Outwardly, it was the same Susan. Only when she got home in the evening, she remembered those 15 days she had spent with Thomas. And no matter how hard she tried to push the memories away, she couldn't. As soon as the cheerful orange toenails came her way, she thought, "Is my bookcase still on his window?" She also smiled sadly. Thrown away long ago, of course. After all, it had been half a month since Helen had arrived. Walking into the pastry shop, I involuntarily searched with my eyes for a beautiful cake. I wish I could buy one so that I could have tea with Thomas in the evening. I shook my head and scolded myself. How could anyone go so crazy? How could you let yourself do such a thing? To develop in a couple of weeks an enduring habit toward the man, a habit of measuring everything in the world against Thomas's existence as if he belonged to her. No, it would drive her crazy. Something had to be done. Meanwhile, time passed, changing the pictures outside the window. The greenery on the trees was darker, the leaves had lost their freshness, and in some places they were tanning brown or even yellowing at the edges. The grass on the lawns also wilted a little. Only the sturdy marigolds, absolutely as before, shone bright orange like little suns, bringing joy to the sad landscape. Several months passed. Helen had not called once during that time, and Susan, of course, had not called either. Calling Thomas was out of the question. Susan felt guilty, and now a new feeling was slowly taking hold. She regretted what had happened, but not that she had betrayed her friend. No, she deeply regretted that she had not been able to convince Thomas that he was worthy of love and happiness. She should have gone back and rushed after him and told him he was no invalid. Doesn't she care if he's in a wheelchair or driving an expensive car? After all, he's still him. A priceless man with all his talents and inherent in him alone, marvelous eyes and noble heart. There was no telling how much longer this state of hers would last, hope mixed with the determination growing inside. It was becoming more her own, considered, fictionalized to her with each passing day. It became so much easier to live when Susan realized it seemed herself. She was now calm and confident. Even her gait changed in Susan, becoming more confident. Her back straightened, the girl seemed taller and slimmer. That evening she came home from work earlier than usual. She didn't want to go anywhere. Susan aspired for some reason to her cozy house, to the familiar comfort of wooden walls, where warmth and music always reigned. First of all, having turned on the melodies of the past years, she washed her hands and went to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner. "What's up?" she asked from the refrigerator. "What are you guarding here?" The refrigerator was silent. Susan took out defrosted meat and potatoes and stood at the stove with a knife in her hand. "Who am I cooking all this for?" she said bitterly, forgetting how she had just been walking briskly down the street, convincing herself that life in mid-September was wonderful. How quickly do girls who live alone in a small old house change their moods? Her musings were interrupted by a knock on the door. Susan stood up. It must be one of the neighbors, for salt or matches. The houses in the private sector were densely packed, and everyone knew each other, and since it was a short walk to the store, they often went to each other's houses for small things. As a matter of course, they took for granted small requests to neighbors and mutual favors and services. Susan walked quietly, but had time to wonder as she walked. The door was normally open, and they came in easily, without ringing or knocking. She opened the door and almost fell in. On the porch was Thomas. He had a huge bouquet of flowers in his lap. And yes, they were fragrant, fire-burning marigolds, Susan's ubiquitous and adored small flowers. Coals burning, even releasing already in the semi-darkness. Several months passed. Helen had not called once during that time, and Susan, of course, had not called either. Calling Thomas was out of the question. Susan felt guilty, and now a new feeling was slowly taking hold. She regretted what had happened, but not that she had betrayed her friend. No, she deeply regretted that she had not been able to convince Thomas that he was worthy of love and happiness. She should have gone back and rushed after him and told him he was no invalid. Doesn't she care if he's in a wheelchair or driving an expensive car? After all, he's still him. A priceless man with all his talents and inherent in him alone, marvelous eyes and noble heart. There was no telling how much longer this state of hers would last, hope mixed with the determination growing inside. It was becoming more her own, considered, fictionalized to her with each passing day. It became so much easier to live when Susan realized it seemed herself. She was now calm and confident. Even her gait changed in Susan, becoming more confident, her back straightened, the girl seemed taller and slimmer. That evening she came home from work earlier than usual. She didn't want to go anywhere. Susan aspired for some reason to her cozy house, to the familiar comfort of wooden walls, where warmth and music always reigned. First of all, having turned on the melodies of the past years, she washed her hands and went to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner. "What's up?" she asked from the refrigerator. "What are you guarding here?" The refrigerator was silent. Susan took out defrosted meat and potatoes and stood at the stove with a knife in her hand. "Who am I cooking all this for?" she said bitterly, forgetting how she had just been walking briskly down the street, convincing herself that life in mid-September was wonderful. How quickly do girls who live alone in a small old house change their moods? Her musings were interrupted by a knock on the door. Susan stood up. It must be one of the neighbors, for salt or matches. The houses in the private sector were densely packed, and everyone knew each other, and since it was a short walk to the store, they often went to each other's houses for small things. As a matter of course, they took for granted small requests to neighbors and mutual favors and services. Susan walked quietly, but had time to wonder as she walked. The door was normally open, and they came in easily, without ringing or knocking. She opened the door and almost fell in. On the porch was Thomas. He had a huge bouquet of flowers in his lap. And yes, they were fragrant, fire-burning marigolds, Susan's ubiquitous and adored small flowers. Coals burning, even releasing already in the semi-darkness. Susan awed and pressed her hands to her cheeks. Susan, in short, I can't be without you. If the prospect of being the wife of an invalid doesn't frighten you, Jesus, Thomas, what are you talking about? What kind of invalid are you? Susan deftly rolled Thomas' wheelchair across the threshold and stepped forward to open the door. Thomas rolled smoothly inside, stopping in the kitchen. He smiled and rubbed his hands together. It seems there's no need for man hands around here. What good timing, if you only knew. Susan whispered, lowering herself into the chair next to Thomas and reaching for him. However, the endless hugs and kisses did not prevent the lovers from preparing a delicious dinner. After all, Thomas had become almost a pro at cooking, practicing in the kitchen almost from the beginning of his stroller life. They talked loudly across the hallways of the room, heard no response, talked again, and it didn't matter what about. Susan, eyes shining, was running back and forth through the house because she had decided to set dinner in the hall. She pulled out the festive tablecloth, rattled the cups from her grandmother's set, ran to the kitchen to wash the flutes. Then she laughed for a long time without saying why. After she laughed, she confessed to Thomas, I don't have any wine to pour into the glasses. The store's closed. What's the trouble? Thomas reassured her. We'll pour tea in them. After confessing their love to each other 100 times, the young people finally sat down at the table. They clinked the tea poured into crystal flutes, and Thomas coughed, playing the old Toastmaster. Let us drink this divine nectar to the fact that the walls of this splendid house will never hear the crying or see the tears of its beautiful mistress. Susan, looking confusedly into Thomas's eyes, interrupted him at the last words. A beautiful toast. Thank you, Thomas. But you know, I suggest we drink to something else. I have a surprise for you, so let's drink to it. She held out a leaf across the table to Thomas. The man took it carefully in both hands and scrutinized it carefully. It was not a clear picture from the ultrasound machine, but a photograph of a new life being born.